In the frost-bitten shadows of Gorston Hall, a blood-curdling scream shatters the Christmas Eve silence. Why was Simeon Lee, a cruel patriarch, found dead in a locked room, his throat slashed, with no footprints in the snow? As secrets unravel and diamonds vanish, Hercule Poirot faces a chilling question. Who among this fractured family, or an outsider with a hidden grudge, wove a deadly web of deception? Suspense tightens with every clue in this festive slaughter. Chapter 1. The summoning to Gorston Hall. The wind howled across the frosted hills of Shropshire, carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of the countryside. It was December 23rd, and the village of Adelsfield, nestled in a valley where the river Severn bent like a silver ribbon, lay under a blanket of snow. The air was thick with the scent of pine and coal smoke as villagers bustled about, their breaths puffing in clouds, preparing for the Christmas festivities. Holly wreaths adorned cottage doors, and the faint jingle of bells from a distant sleigh mingled with the laughter of children pelting each other with snowballs. Yet, beneath this festive veneer, an undercurrent of unease stirred, for the grand manor of Gorston Hall loomed on the outskirts, its silhouette stark against the pale sky. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with a mustache as precise as a geometric proof, stood at the window of Colonel Johnson's modest home in Adelsfield, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. He gazed out at the snow-draped landscape, his sharp eyes taking in every detail, the way the icicles clung to the eaves like crystalline daggers, the footprints crisscrossing the village square, and the distant glow of Gorston Hall's windows, flickering like the eyes of a beast in the twilight. Colonel Johnson, chief constable of the county and an old friend, poured 2 glasses of mulled wine, the aroma of cloves and cinnamon filling the cozy parlor. "You seem distracted," Poirot Johnson remarked, his weathered face creasing with a smile as he handed over a glass. "Is it the cold, or are those little grey cells of yours already sniffing out a mystery in our quiet village?" Poirot took the glass, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Mon ami, the cold is merely an inconvenience to the body, but the mind it hungers for a puzzle, and I suspect that Gorston Hall, with its master and his summons, may provide one." Johnson raised an eyebrow. "Simeon Lee, you mean the old devil's been stirring up trouble again, hasn't he? Word is, he's called his whole family back to the manor for Christmas. First time in years they'll all be under one roof." Precisement, Poirot murmured, sipping the warm wine, "and where there is a family reunion, there is often a storm brewing beneath the surface. Tell me, what do you know of this Simeon Lee?" Johnson settled into an armchair by the fire, its crackling logs casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Simeon's a piece of work, that's for sure. Made his fortune in South African diamonds decades ago, but he's no gentleman. Sharp as a tack, mind you, but cruel, likes to play games with people, especially his own kin. He's got 4 sons. Alfred, the dutiful one who stayed at home. Harry, the prodigal who's been gallivanting abroad. George, a pompous MP with a taste for luxury. And David, the sensitive artist who hasn't spoken to his father in years. Then there's Pilar, his granddaughter from a Spanish marriage nobody talks about. They're all converging on Gorston Hall, and I'd wager it's not just for mince pies and carols." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A patriarch who summons his estranged family, each with their own grievances, to a secluded manor in the depths of winter. It is, how you say, a recipe for drama. And yet, there is more." Nan Johnson leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's talk in the village. Simeon's been on the telephone with his solicitor, muttering about changing his will. The man's worth a fortune, diamonds, investments, you name it. If he's toying with the inheritance, it's bound to set tongues wagging and tempers flaring." "Most interesting," Poirot said, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "A will, a family divided, and a manor isolated by snow. It is a stage set for a tragedy or perhaps a crime." As if on cue, a knock came at the door, sharp and insistent. Johnson rose, his boots creaking on the floorboards, and returned with a folded note bearing the crest of Gorston Hall. He handed it to Poirot, who unfolded it with the precision of a surgeon. The message was brief, written in a spidery hand. "Dear Colonel Johnson, I understand you have a guest of some renown. I would be delighted if you and M. Poirot would join us at Gorston Hall for Christmas Eve dinner tomorrow. My family is gathering and I believe your presence would add a certain sparkle to the occasion. Do come, yours." Simeon Lepro's mustache twitched, an invitation from the lion himself. How could one refuse? The next morning, Poirot and Johnson set out for Gorston Hall, their carriage crunching through the snow. The manor came into view as they crested a hill, its Tudor facade a patchwork of ivy and stone, its chimneys puffing smoke into the leaden sky. The grounds were a winter wonderland, with fir trees draped in frost and a frozen fountain glistening like a chandelier. Yet the beauty was marred by an air of foreboding, as if the house itself held secrets in its shadowed halls. They were greeted at the door by Tressilian the butler, a stooped man with eyes that darted like a nervous bird's. "Welcome, gentlemen," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Lee is expecting you." The entrance hall was a spectacle of Christmas opulence, a towering fir tree adorned with glass baubles and tinsel, garlands of holly looping along the banisters, and a chandelier casting prisms of light across the oak-paneled walls. Yet the warmth of the decorations was undercut by the chill in the air, not of temperature, but of mood. Voices echoed from the drawing room, sharp and discordant. Poirot's keen eyes took in every detail as Tressilian led them forward. The parquet floor gleamed, but a faint scuff mark near the staircase caught his attention. A maid hurried past, her apron askew, casting a wary glance over her shoulder. The scent of roasting chestnuts mingled with something metallic, faint but unmistakable. Poirot filed it away, his mind already spinning. In the drawing room, the Lee family was assembled, a tableau of strained civility. Alfred Lee, thin and earnest, stood by the fire, his wife Lydia beside him, her delicate features set in a mask of politeness. Harry Lee lounged against a bookcase, his handsome face smirking, a glass of brandy in hand. George Lee, portly and red-faced, was lecturing his mousy wife Magdalene about expenses, while David Lee, pale and intense, stared out the window, his wife Hilda trying to soothe him. Pilar Estravados, the granddaughter, was a vision of dark beauty, her eyes gleaming with secrets as she toyed with a string of pearls. And at the center of it all sat Simeon Lee, his wheelchair positioned like a throne, his hawkish eyes glinting with malice. Colonel Johnson and the famous M. Poirot. Simeon's voice was a rasp, laced with mockery. "Welcome to my humble Christmas gathering. I trust you'll find it enlightening." Poirot bowed, his demeanor impeccable. "Monsieur Lee, your invitation is most gracious. I look forward to observing the, how you say, harmony of your family." Simeon's laugh was a dry cackle. "Harmony? Oh, you'll see plenty, detective, plenty." The conversation that followed was a delicate dance of pleasantries, each word laced with undercurrent of resentment. Alfred spoke of the estate's upkeep, his voice tight with devotion to his father. Harry regaled the room with tales of his travels, each anecdote a jab at his brother's staid lives. George blustered about his political duties, while David remained silent, his eyes fixed on Simeon with a hatred so palpable it seemed to chill the room. Pilar, meanwhile, watched it all with an enigmatic smile, her accent lilting as she spoke of her late mother's connection to the family. Lydia, ever the gracious hostess, steered the conversation to safer topics: Christmas traditions, the village pageant, but even she couldn't mask the tension. Poirot noted the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea, the way Harry's smirk faltered when Simeon mentioned the will, the way George's face reddened at the mention of money. Every gesture, every glance was a clue, and Poirot's mind catalogued them all. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining room, where a feast awaited: roast goose glistening with fat, plum pudding flaming with brandy, and crystal goblets filled with ruby-red wine. The table, Whitney Poirot sat at the head of the table, opposite Simeon, who presided with a grim smile. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by Simeon's barbed remarks. He teased Alfred about his loyalty, mocked George's ambitions, and hinted at secrets about David's past, each comment sharpening the air with hostility. As the meal drew to a close, Simeon leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, my friends, a time for surprises, and I have a few in store." His gaze swept the table, lingering on each face, and Poirot felt a prickle of unease. The old man was playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were high. After dinner, Poirot slipped away to explore the manor, his curiosity piqued by the scuff mark and the metallic scent. In a quiet corridor, he found a small study, its door ajar. Inside, a heavy oak desk bore a curious mark, a diamond-shaped indentation, as if something sharp had been pressed into the wood. Poirot ran his finger along it, his mind racing. Diamonds, Johnson had said. Could this be a clue to Simeon's fortune or his downfall? He returned to the drawing room where the family had reconvened, their voices low and tense. Colonel Johnson was deep in conversation with Lydia, who seemed on the verge of tears. Harry was pouring another drink while Pilar whispered something to David, who flinched as if struck. The air was thick with secrets, and Poirot knew he was standing on the edge of a precipice. As he and Johnson prepared to leave, Poirot paused at the door, turning to Simeon. "Monsieur, I thank you for your hospitality. I sense that this Christmas will be memorable." Simeon's eyes narrowed. "Oh, it will be, Poirot. It will be." The carriage ride back to Adelsfield was silent, the snow falling heavily now, cloaking the world in white. Johnson glanced at Poirot, his face grim. "Trouble's coming, isn't it?" Poirot nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of Gorston Hall. "Oui, mon ami. Trouble is already here." The chapter drew to a close with Poirot alone in his room, staring at the snow, his mind turning over the diamond-shaped mark, the metallic scent, and Simeon's cryptic words. He knew the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and tomorrow, Christmas Eve, would bring the first revelation. For now, the manor slept under its snowy shroud, but the storm was gathering, and Hercule Poirot would be ready. Chapter 2. The Patriarch's Provocation. The snow fell steadily outside Gorston Hall, cloaking the sprawling estate in a deceptive calm. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes a storm. Hercule Poirot adjusted his neatly pressed coat, his sharp eyes scanning the grand parlor where the Lee family had gathered at Simeon Lee's command. The room was a testament to opulence, with its towering Christmas tree adorned with glass baubles and tinsel, a roaring fire casting flickering shadows across the polished mahogany panels, and a chandelier glittering above like a constellation trapped indoors. Yet, despite the festive trappings, the atmosphere was anything but warm. Simeon Lee, the aging patriarch, sat at the head of the room in a high-backed chair that resembled a throne. His thin frame was wrapped in a velvet smoking jacket, and his gnarled hands clutched a silver-headed cane. His eyes, sharp and predatory, gleamed with a malicious delight as he surveyed his family. The sons Alfred, Harry, George, and David stood or sat in various states of discomfort, their wives at their sides, each face a mask of restrained emotion. Pilar Estravados, the enigmatic granddaughter, leaned against a window, her dark eyes unreadable as she toyed with a strand of her raven hair. The butler Tressilian hovered near the door, his expression one of practiced neutrality. Poirot, invited under the pretense of a holiday guest at Colonel Johnson's suggestion, stood slightly apart, his small stature and impeccable mustache making him an oddity among the towering Lees. He had accepted the invitation with a polite nod, sensing an undercurrent of intrigue in the village gossip about Simeon's sudden summons. Now, as he observed the family, he felt the familiar prickle of curiosity, his little gray cells already stirring. Simeon's voice cut through the room like a blade. "So, you've all come crawling back to Gorston Hall, have you?" he rasped, his lips curling into a sneer. "My loving family gathered for Christmas, how touching." His sarcasm was palpable and the room seemed to shrink under its weight. Alfred, the eldest son, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His thin face, lined with years of devotion to his father's whims, betrayed a flicker of hurt. "Father, we came because you asked," he said quietly, his voice steady but strained. His wife Lydia sat beside him, her delicate hands folded in her lap, her expression serene yet watchful. "Asked," Simeon barked, slamming his cane against the floor. The sound echoed, making Pilar glance up sharply. "I don't ask, Alfred, I command, and you, my dutiful son, always obey, don't you? Living here, under my roof, eating my food, while the rest of you," his eyes swept over his other sons, "scuttle off to live your pathetic little lives." Harry, the second son, lounged against the mantelpiece, his roguish grin unfazed. "Come now, father, let's not start the festivities with a sermon. We're here, aren't we? That's what you wanted." His voice was smooth, almost mocking, but his eyes held a glint of defiance. His wife Hilda, a sturdy woman with a no-nonsense air, shot him a warning glance, which he ignored. George, the pompous third son, adjusted his tie with a huff. "I, for one, have a perfectly respectable life, father. My position in Parliament is hardly pathetic." His wife, Magdalene, a younger woman with a penchant for extravagant jewelry, nodded vigorously, though her eyes darted nervously toward Simeon. David, the youngest son, stood by the window, his sensitive face pale and drawn. His hands were clenched, and his wife Jennifer touched his arm gently as if to anchor him. "You didn't have to summon us like this, father," David said, his voice low but edged with bitterness. "You know why we don't come here." Simeon's laugh was a dry, rattling sound. "Oh, I know, David, you're still sulking over your poor dear mother. Always the artist, painting your misery for the world to see. And you, George, with your speeches and your debts, don't think I don't know about those. Harry the wastrel gallivanting around the world, spending what you never earned. And Alfred, my loyal shadow, too weak to stand on your own." The room bristled with tension, each son absorbing the barbs in their own way. Poirot's eyes flicked from face to face, noting the tightened jaws, the averted gazes, the subtle shifts in posture. This was no mere family reunion. It was a stage, and Simeon was the director of a cruel play. "And you, Pilar," Simeon continued, turning his gaze to his granddaughter, "my exotic little bird, flown in from some Spanish scandal, what do you make of this sorry lot?" His tone was almost affectionate, but there was a sting beneath it, as if he were testing her. Pilar's lips curved into a faint smile, her accent soft but deliberate. "I think, grandfather, that families are like puzzles. Each piece is different, but they must fit together." "No." Her words were light, but her eyes held a sharpness that matched Simeon's own. Before anyone could respond, the door swung open, and Tressilian announced, "Mr. Stephen Farr, sir." A tall, broad-shouldered man strode in, his dark hair slightly tousled, his smile disarming. He wore a well-tailored suit, but there was an ease about him, a confidence that set him apart from the stiff formality of the Lees. "Mr. Lee," he said, inclining his head toward Simeon, "thank you for the invitation. It's been too long." Simeon's face lit up, a stark contrast to the venom he directed at his sons. "Stephen, my boy, come in, come in. Gentlemen, ladies, this is Stephen Farr, son of my late partner Charles Farr, a fine man, Charles, and his sons no less." He gestured for Stephen to take a seat, ignoring the puzzled glances exchanged among the family. Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly. An outsider, introduced with such warmth, this was unexpected, and therefore significant. He noted the way Harry's grin faltered. George's scowl deepened, and Alfred's fingers tightened on his chair. Even Pilar seemed to study Stephen with a new intensity. "Father," George said, his voice tight, "you never mentioned inviting Mr. Farr. What's the occasion?" Simeon leaned back, his eyes glinting with mischief. "The occasion, George, is Christmas, and perhaps a chance to stir things up. You all think you know me, don't you? Think you've got my measure. But I've a few surprises left." He tapped his cane rhythmically, the sound a slow, deliberate beat. "I've been speaking to my solicitor, you see, about my will. It's time for some changes." A collective intake of breath filled the room. Alfred's face paled. Harry's grin vanished. George's hand froze on his tie, and David's eyes narrowed. Jennifer's hand tightened on her husband's arm, and Magdalene's jewelry jangled as she shifted nervously. Pilar alone seemed unmoved, her gaze fixed on Simeon as if trying to read his thoughts. Poirot, standing quietly by a bookcase, felt the air shift. The mention of the will was no idle threat. It was a spark thrown into dry tinder. He observed the family's reactions with the precision of a watchmaker, noting every twitch, every glance. This was not just a family squabble, it was a prelude to something darker. "What kind of changes?" Harry asked, his voice casual but his eyes hard. Simeon chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down Poirot's spine. "Oh, you'll see, Harry, you'll all see. I've built this fortune, and I'll decide who gets it or who doesn't. Maybe I'll leave it to someone who deserves it." His eyes flicked towards Stephen, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Father, this is absurd," George sputtered. "You can't just can't I," Simeon snapped, his voice cutting like a whip. "I can do whatever I damn well please, George. You've all taken from me, lived off my name, my money, but I'm not dead yet, and I'll have my fun." Lydia spoke for the first time, her voice soft but firm. "Father-in-law, surely this isn't the time for such talk. It's Christmas. Can we not have peace?" "Peace?" Simeon echoed, his tone mocking. "There's no peace in this house, Lydia, and you know it. You're all waiting for me to die, counting my money in your heads. Well, I'll give you something to think about this Christmas none of you will forget." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Poirot's gaze darted to the desk behind Simeon, where a small, diamond-shaped mark caught the firelight. It was faint, almost invisible, but it struck him as out of place on the otherwise pristine surface. He filed it away, his mind already turning over possibilities. Dinner followed, a strained affair in the dining room where the clink of silverware was louder than conversation. Simeon presided over the table like a king, his mood mercurial, shifting from jibes to sudden bursts of laughter. Poirot, seated between Hilda and Jennifer, listened more than he spoke, his ears attuned to every word, every pause. The family's unease was palpable, each member a coiled spring, ready to snap. As the meal ended and the family dispersed, Poirot lingered in the parlor, his fingers brushing the diamond-shaped mark on Simeon's desk. It was no scratch, he realized, but a deliberate indentation, as if something had been pressed into the wood. A clue, perhaps, or a remnant of some forgotten act. His eyes narrowed, his mind racing. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing in silence. But within, the storm was just beginning. Chapter 3. The crash in the night. The snow fell in thick, relentless curtains over Gorston Hall, cloaking the sprawling manor in a deceptive serenity. Inside, the air was heavy with the weight of unspoken grievances, the crackle of the hearth in the grand parlor doing little to warm the strained atmosphere. It was Christmas Eve, and the Lee family, summoned by the patriarch Simeon Lee, had gathered in a reluctant tableau of festivity. The long dining table, adorned with crystal and silver, bore the remnants of a lavish dinner, but the clink of cutlery had long ceased, replaced by the soft, uneasy murmur of conversation. Hercule Poirot, seated at the edge of the room as a guest of Colonel Johnson, observed the scene with his characteristic precision, his small, neat moustache twitching slightly as his sharp eyes darted from face to face. Simeon Lee, the cantankerous head of the household, had retired early, his wheelchair creaking as he departed with a cryptic smirk, leaving his family to stew in their resentments. His sons Alfred, the dutiful but weary eldest, Harry, the roguish prodigal, George, the pompous politician, and David, the brooding artist, sat in uneasy proximity, their wives exchanging tight smiles. Pilar Estravados, the exotic granddaughter from Spain, drew curious glances, her dark eyes gleaming with an unreadable intensity. Stephen Farr, the unexpected guest and son of Simeon's late business partner, leaned back in his chair, his easy charm a stark contrast to the family's tension. The clock in the hall struck 9, its chimes reverberating through the high ceilings. Poirot, nursing a glass of mulled wine, noted the subtle shifts in posture, Alfred's clenched jaw, Harry's restless fingers, George's self-important huff, and David's distant stare. Pilar's laughter, light and almost too carefree, cut through the silence, drawing a scowl from Lydia, Alfred's wife. The firelight cast long shadows, and Poirot's gaze lingered on the ornate diamond-shaped carving on the mantel, a detail that seemed to hum with significance in his meticulous mind. As the family began to disperse, some to the drawing room for cards, others to their chambers. Poirot remained, his attention caught by a faint sound, a low, deliberate whistle from somewhere above. He tilted his head, filing the observation away, and rose to follow Colonel Johnson, who had invited him to stay the night at the nearby village. But before he could depart, a sudden violent crash shattered the quiet, echoing from the upper floors like the collapse of a great oak. It was followed, almost instantly, by a screamer, raw, guttural cry that froze the blood. The family halted, faces pulling. Alfred was the first to move, his footsteps pounding up the grand staircase, followed closely by Harry and George. David hesitated, his hand gripping the banister, while Pilar's eyes widened, her fingers clutching her shawl. Lydia and the other wives trailed behind, their voices overlapping in a chorus of alarm. Poirot, with his measured gait, followed, his mind already racing through possibilities. Colonel Johnson, ever the practical man, barked orders to the servants to fetch lanterns and tools. The source of the commotion was clear. Simeon Lee's private study, a fortified sanctuary at the end of the second-floor corridor. The heavy oak door, carved with intricate patterns, was locked tight, its brass handle unyielding. Alfred rattled it, his voice hoarse. "Father, father, are you all right?" Silence answered, save for the faint whistle of wind through the manor's ancient walls. Harry, with a grunt, threw his shoulder against the door, but it held fast. George, red-faced, demanded the butler Tressilian produce a key. The elderly servant, trembling, confessed that Simeon kept the only key, and the door was bolted from within. "Break it down," Harry growled, his usual charm replaced by a fierce determination. Alfred hesitated, glancing at his brothers, but David, his voice low and urgent, agreed. "We must get inside. Something's wrong." The men, joined by Stephen Farr, set to work, their combined strength splintering the wood around the lock. After several blows, the door gave way with a groan, revealing a scene that stopped them cold. Simeon Lee lay sprawled across the floor of his study, his throat slashed open, a crimson pool spreading beneath him. The room was in chaos, furniture overturned, a heavy oak table appended, papers scattered like fallen leaves. A silver candelabrum lay shattered, its candles snuffed out in the blood. The window, a tall arched pane overlooking the snow-covered grounds, was shut tight, its latch undisturbed. No footprints marred the pristine snow outside, and the room's only other exit was the now broken door. Poirot stepped forward, his small frame commanding the room's attention despite the horror. "Do not touch anything," he said sharply, his Belgian accent cutting through the stunned silence. His eyes swept the scene, cataloguing every detail: the angle of the body, the smear of blood on the rug, the faint glint of something metallic near the fireplace. The family stood frozen, their breaths shallow, as Poirot knelt beside Simeon's body, his gloved fingers hovering over the wound. "A clean cut," he murmured, almost to himself, "precise, deliberate." Colonel Johnson, at Poirot's side, cleared his throat. "This is murder, Poirot, no question about it." His voice was grim, his policeman's instincts kicking in. "But how?" The door was locked, the window sealed. No one could have entered or left. Poirot's lips curved faintly, not in amusement but in recognition of the challenge. "Oui, mon ami." Locked room, a dead man, and a family with many secrets. This is no ordinary murder. His gaze flicked to the family, each member standing in the doorway, their faces a mosaic of shock, fear, and Poirot noted with interest. Alfred's hands trembled, Harry's jaw was set, George's eyes darted nervously, and David's face was a mask of anguish. Pilar, clutching Stephen's arm, whispered something in Spanish, her voice too low to catch. The wives, clustered together, it seemed to shrink from the scene, though Lydia's eyes held a curious intensity. Poirot rose, brushing his hands together as if to dispel the chill of death. "We must secure this room," he said. "No one enters until the police arrive. Colonel, if you would be so kind." Johnson nodded, already motioning for the servants to stand guard. Poirot turned to the family, his voice calm but commanding. "I will need to speak with each of you. Alone there is much to uncover, and the truth, it hides in the smallest details." As the family dispersed, their whispers trailing like ghosts down the corridor, Poirot lingered, his eyes returning to the glint near the fireplace. He crouched, retrieving a tiny shard of what appeared to be a diamond, its facets catching the dim light. He slipped it into a handkerchief, his mind worried. The locked room, the scream, the crash, all pieces of a puzzle that, he was certain, would reveal a most ingenious crime. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Gorston Hall in silence, but within its walls, the air thrummed with secrets waiting to be unraveled. The hours that followed were a blur of activity, though moved through it with the precision of a conductor orchestrating a symphony. The local police, summoned by Colonel Johnson, arrived in a flurry of boots and lanterns, their faces grim as they surveyed the carnage. The coroner, a dour man named Dr. Pritchard, confirmed Simeon's death was caused by a single, deep slash to the throat, likely inflicted with a sharp blade, perhaps a dagger or a letter opener. The absence of the murder weapon in the room only deepened the mystery. Poirot, granted permission to assist due to his reputation and Johnson's endorsement, began his examination in earnest. The study was a treasure trove of contradictions. The overturned furniture suggested a struggle. Yet Simeon's body bore no defensive wounds, no bruises or scratches to indicate a fight. The blood pool, still tacky underfoot, had spread in a near-perfect circle, undisturbed by footprints or drag marks. The window, as Poirot confirmed, was locked from the inside, its latch rusted with age, untouched for years. The snow outside, pristine and unbroken, ruled out an external intruder. The diamond shard, now safely tucked in Poirot's pocket, gnawed at his thoughts. Simeon Lee had made his fortune in South African diamond mines, a fact well known to the family. Could the shard be a clue to his wealth or something more sinister? Poirot's gaze lingered on the fireplace, its hearth cold despite the roaring fire earlier that evening. The diamond-shaped mark on Simeon's desk, noted the previous day, seemed to echo the shard's presence, a connection he could not yet define. The family, sequestered in the drawing-room, awaited questioning. Poirot began with Tressilian the butler, whose loyalty to Simeon spanned decades. The old man, his hands trembling, recounted the evening's events. Simeon had dined alone, in his study, as was his custom, and had dismissed Tressilian at 8 o'clock. The butler had heard nothing unusual until the crash, though he admitted, with some hesitation, to the faint whistle Poirot had noted earlier. "It came from upstairs, Sir," Tressilian said, his voice quavering. "I thought it was the wind, or perhaps one of the maids." Poirot's questions were gentle but probing, extracting every detail of the household's routine. Tressilian revealed that Simeon kept his study locked at all times, even when inside, a habit born of paranoia about his wealth. The key, a heavy brass affair, was found in Simeon's pocket, bent slightly as if forced. The bolt, however, was another matter. Its mechanism was internal, accessible only from within the room. Poirot filed this away, his mind turning to the possibility of a hidden mechanism or a clever ruse. Next, Poirot spoke with Alfred, whose pale face and trembling hands betrayed his shock. "I was in the library, going over accounts," Alfred said, his voice tight. "Father's demands were endless. I heard the crash and ran upstairs." His alibi was corroborated by the housekeeper, who had seen him leave the library moments before the scream. Yet Poirot noted Alfred's dependence on his father's wealth, a motive that simmered beneath his loyalty. Harry, questioned in the billiard room, was less forthcoming. "I was outside, smoking in the garden," he said, his tone defiant. "Heard the crash, thought the old man had knocked something over in one of his tantrums." His roguish charm was tempered by a flicker of unease, and Poirot wondered what grudges Harry harbored from his years of estrangement. George, puffing himself up like a peacock, claimed to have been in the drawing-room discussing politics with his wife Hilda. "I heard the scream and knew something was terribly wrong," he said, his voice dripping with self-importance. Hilda nodded, her expression guarded, but Poirot sensed a discrepancy in their timing. A detail to revisit. David, the most visibly shaken, spoke in halting whispers. "I was in my room sketching," he said, his eyes haunted. "Father's cruelty, it never stopped, but I didn't kill him." His wife Jennifer hovered nearby, her hand on his shoulder. But Poirot noted her tense posture, as if guarding a secret. Pilar Travados, with her dark beauty and enigmatic smile, claimed to have been lost in the manor's labyrinthine halls, searching for her room. "I am new to this house," she said, her Spanish accent thick. "I heard the scream and followed the others." Her story was plausible, yet Poirot's instincts told him she was holding something back. Stephen Farr, the outsider, was the last to be questioned, his easy smile and open demeanor disarmed. But Poirot was not fooled. "I was in the conservatory admiring the orchids," Stephen said. "Simeon invited me here, you know. Said he had something to discuss about my father's share of the business." The mention of Simeon's diamond ventures piqued Poirot's interest, but Stephen's alibi, like the others, lacked witnesses. As the night wore on, the family retired to their rooms, their faces etched with suspicion. Poirot remained in the study, alone with the body, now covered with a sheet. He paced the room, his mind a whirl of facts and contradictions. The crash, the scream, the locked door, the diamond shard all pointed to a carefully orchestrated crime, one designed to confound. Yet Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the fragments. He paused by the fireplace, his fingers tracing the diamond-shaped mark on the desk. The shard, the mark, the whistle, they were threads in a tapestry, and Poirot was determined to unravel it. The room, sealed like a tomb, held the key to the killer's method, and Poirot's sharp mind would not rest until it was found outside. The snow fell thicker, burying Gorston Hall in a silent shroud. But within, the mystery burned bright, a puzzle worthy of Hercule Poirot's genius. Chapter 4. Suspicions in the snow. The snow fell relentlessly outside Gorston Hall, blanketing the estate in a deceptive calm that mirrored the fragile civility within. Hercule Poirot, his small frame bundled in a heavy overcoat, stood at the edge of the grand hall, his sharp eyes scanning the family members who had gathered in the wake of Simeon Lee's brutal murder. The air was thick with suspicion, each glance a silent accusation, each whispered word a potential clue. The patriarch's death in the locked room, with no footprints in the snow outside, had left them all reeling, and Poirot knew the truth lay buried in the tangled web of motives and secrets that bound this fractured family. The great hall, adorned with garlands and a towering Christmas tree, felt like a stage for a grim drama. Alfred Lee, the eldest son, sat rigidly by the fireplace, his thin face pale and drawn, his hands clasped tightly as if to anchor himself against the storm of accusations. His wife Lydia hovered nearby, her delicate features composed but her eyes darting nervously. George Lee, the pompous politician, paced near the window, his florid cheeks flushed with agitation as he muttered about the scandal this would bring to his public image. His wife Magdalene, younger and ostentatiously dressed, toyed with a string of pearls, her expression unreadable. David Lee, the sensitive artist, stood apart, his dark eyes burning with a quiet intensity, while his wife, Hilda, a sturdy woman with a calm demeanor, rested a hand on his arm as if to steady him. Harry Lee, the prodigal son, lounged against a pillar, his roguish charm undimmed but his smirk strained. Pilar Estravados, the exotic granddaughter, glided through the room, her dark eyes enigmatic, her presence an unsettling wildcard, and Stephen Farr, the outsider with a disarming smile, lingered near the doorway, watching the family with a curiosity that Poirot found both intriguing and suspicious. Colonel Johnson, the local chief of police and Poirot's friend, had joined them, his burly figure a reassuring presence amid the chaos. "Monsieur Poirot," he said in a low voice, "this is a devil of a case, a locked room, a slashed throat, and not a single track in the snow. It's as if the killer vanished into thin air." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Non, mon ami. The killer did not vanish. They are here, among us, hiding behind a mask of grief or innocence. The locked room is but a puzzle, and every puzzle has a solution. We must look to the people, their motives, their secrets." He began his investigation, with methodical precision, moving through the family like a surgeon probing for a wound. First he approached Alfred, who sat staring into the fire, his loyalty to his father a cornerstone of his identity. "Monsieur Alfred," Poirot began, his tone gentle but probing, "your father was a man of strong will. And you, stayed by his side, managing his estate, while your brothers sought their own paths. Was there resentment in this duty?" Alfred's eyes flickered, but his voice was steady. "I loved my father, Monsieur Poirot. He was difficult, yes, but he provided for us. I managed Gorston Hall because it was my duty, not because I sought reward. If you're implying I had reason to harm him—" He broke off, his hands tightening. "I was in my study, going over accounts, when we heard the crash. Lydia can confirm it." Lydia nodded, her voice soft but firm. "Alfred was with me, Monsieur Poirot. We heard the scream together and rushed upstairs with the others." Poirot inclined his head, noting the quick confirmation. Too quick, perhaps. He moved on to George, whose bluster filled the room like a storm. "Monsieur George, your father spoke of altering his will. This, I understand, caused you some concern, given your, how shall we say, ambitious lifestyle." George's face reddened. "That's preposterous. I'm a member of Parliament, not some fortune hunter. Yes, father was cruel with his words, always mocking my expenses, but I didn't need his money. I was in the library, reading, when that infernal crash happened. Magdalene was there, weren't you, dear?" Magdalene's lips curved in a faint smile. "Oh yes." George was buried in his papers. "I was looking through a fashion magazine. We heard the scream and ran upstairs together." Poirot's eyes lingered on Magdalene's pearls, noting how her fingers twisted them nervously despite her calm tone. He turned to David, whose brooding presence seemed to absorb the room's tension. "Monsieur David, your father's treatment of your late mother was, I hear, a source of pain. Did this pain turn to anger?" Perhaps. David's jaw tightened, his voice low and raw. "He drove her to her grave with his cruelty. I won't deny I hated him for it, but murder? No, Monsieur Poirot. I was in my room sketching, when the crash came. Hilda was with me." Hilda's steady gaze met Poirot's. "It's true." David was drawing, as he often does, to calm himself. "We heard the noise and joined the others at father's door." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing their alibis, each one neatly corroborated, yet lacking the ring of unassailable truth. He approached Harry, whose casual posture belied a sharpness in his eyes. "Monsieur Harry, you returned to Gorston Hall after years abroad, welcomed by your father despite past quarrels. Did his warmth surprise you, or did it mask another of his games?" Harry's grin was wolfish. The old man was playing us all, as usual. He loved stirring the pot, seeing who'd cracked. I didn't care about his money. I've made my own way. I was in the garden, having a smoke, when I heard the commotion. Ask the groundskeeper if you don't believe me." Poirot made a mental note to do just that. He turned to Pilar, whose dark beauty and foreign accent drew every eye. "Mademoiselle Estravados, you are new to this family, yet your grandfather welcomed you warmly. Did you feel the weight of their resentment?" Pilar's smile was enigmatic, her voice lilting. "I am used to being an outsider. Monsieur Poirot, grandfather was kind to me, perhaps because I reminded him of my mother. I was exploring the house, such a big, confusing place, when I heard the scream. I got lost in the corridors and only reached the room after the others. Her vagueness was intriguing, and Poirot filed it away. Finally he approached Stephen Farr, whose easy charm seemed at odds with the grim atmosphere. Monsieur Farr, you arrive unexpectedly, the son of Simeon's late partner. Did you come seeking justice for your father's misfortunes, perhaps? Stephen's smile was disarming. I came because Simeon invited me, Monsieur Poirot. He said he wanted to make amends for old wrongs. I was in the billiard room, practicing shots. When the crash came, the butler Tressilian saw me there. Poirot nodded, his mind a whirl of connections. Each alibi was plausible, yet none felt ironclad. The family's motives were clear: Alfred's financial dependence, George's greed, David's hatred, Harry's old grudges, Pilar's uncertain claim to inheritance, and Stephen's mysterious past. But the locked room and the absence of footprints demanded more than motive. They demanded method. As the family dispersed, Poirot lingered in Simeon's room, now a crime scene cordoned off by Colonel Johnson's men. The heavy oak door, bolted from within, bore no signs of tampering. The window, locked tight, looked out onto a pristine snowdrift, undisturbed by any trace of passage. The overturned furniture, a chair, a table, a shattered vase suggested a struggle, yet the blood pool beneath Simeon's body was oddly contained, as if staged. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied the scene, his little grey cells humming. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Tressilian the butler entered, his lined face etched with unease. Monsieur Poirot, I thought you should know. One of the maids, Horbury, mentioned something odd. She said she heard a strange whistle just before the crash last night. Not a human sound, more like a signal, perhaps. Poirot's mustache twitched. A whistle, you say? Most interesting. Where was Horbury when she heard this? In the servants' hall, sir, preparing tea for the family. She said it came from upstairs, near the master's room. Mercy, Tressilian. This whistle may be a thread in our tapestry. Tell me, was anyone seen near Simeon's room before the crash? Tressilian hesitated. I cannot say for certain, sir. The family was scattered about the house, but I did see Master Harry in the corridor earlier that evening, looking rather furtive. Poirot nodded, dismissing the butler with a wave. The whistle intrigued him, a deliberate signal, perhaps, or a mechanical sound. He filed it away, turning his attention to the room itself. The heavy safe in the corner, built into the wall, caught his eye. Simeon had hinted at altering his will, and a man of his wealth likely kept important documents close. Poirot examined the safe, its door slightly ajar, revealing an empty interior. Whatever had been inside, papers, jewels, or something else, was gone. He crouched, inspecting the lock. No signs of forced entry, suggesting the thief had the combination or a key. The safe's emptiness was a clue in itself, pointing to a motive beyond family feuds. Had Simeon's death been a robbery gone wrong, or was the theft a diversion? Poirot's gaze swept the room, landing on the diamond-shaped mark on Simeon's desk, noted in the previous chapter. It was faint, almost invisible, but deliberate. Clue left by the killer, or an oversight. As he pondered, Lydia entered, her steps hesitant. Monsieur Poirot, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with Tressilian. I saw something last night, before the crash. A shadow, moving near father's door. I couldn't make out who it was, but it was tall, and it moved quickly. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A shadow, Madame Lydia. This is most valuable. Where were you when you saw this figure? I was coming from the library, fetching a book for Alfred. It was dark in the corridor, but I'm certain I saw someone. Merci, madame. Your observation may be the key to unlocking this mystery. Lydia nodded, her expression troubled, and left. Poirot stood alone in the room, the silence broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. The whistle, the empty safe, the shadow, the diamond-shaped mark. These were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit them together. He stepped to the window, testing its lock again. It held firm, but a faint scratch on the latch suggested tampering not from outside, but within. The killer had planned this carefully, staging the locked room to confound suspicion. He returned to the desk, running his fingers over the diamond-shaped mark. It was no accident, no casual scratch. Simeon's past in South African diamond mines, mentioned by Stephen Farr, came to mind. Had the old man kept uncut stones, a fortune hidden in plain sight? The empty safe suggested something valuable had been taken, but the mark hinted at something more specific: a diamond, perhaps, or a tool used to cut one. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by Colonel Johnson, who entered with a grim expression. We've searched the grounds, Poirot. Nothing, no footprints, no signs of an intruder. The family's alibis are holding, for now, but I don't trust any of them. What's your next move? Poirot smiled faintly. My next move, mon ami, is to listen. The house speaks, if one knows how to hear it. The whistle, the shadow, the safe, these are whispers of the truth. We must follow them, and soon, the killer will have nowhere to hide. As Johnson left to coordinate with his men, Poirot lingered, his mind racing. The family's motives were clear, but the method remained elusive. The locked room, the scream, the absence of footprints. It was a performance, a carefully crafted illusion, and the whistle, that strange detail, suggested a signal or a device, perhaps tied to the phonograph he would later discover in the attic. For now, the empty safe loomed large, its missing contents a tantalizing clue. Had the killer taken a will, a fortune, or something else entirely? And who had the cunning to stage such a crime under the noses of a house full of suspects? The snow continued to fall outside, sealing Gorston Hall in a cocoon of white. Poirot adjusted his coat, his resolve hardening. The truth was here, in the suspicions that hung like icicles, in the secrets buried beneath the festive facade. He would find it, no matter how deeply it was hidden. The chapter drew to a close with Poirot standing before the safe, its empty maw a silent challenge. The missing contents, the diamond-shaped mark, the whistle, and the shadow, they were threads in a tapestry of deception, and Poirot was determined to unravel them. The family's alibis, their motives, their lies, they would not escape his scrutiny. As the fire crackled and the snow fell, Poirot knew the key to the murder lay not just in the locked room, but in the hearts of those who called Gorston Hall home. Chapter 5. The Diamond Clue. The snow fell in heavy, relentless sheets outside Gorston Hall, cloaking the manor in a shroud of white that muffled the world beyond its ancient walls. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, each breath drawn by the assembled family members laced with unspoken accusations. Hercule Poirot, his small frame impeccable in a tailored suit despite the chill, stood in the grand parlor, his sharp eyes scanning the faces around him. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced across the room, but it did little to warm the atmosphere. Simeon Lee's brutal murder the previous night had left the household reeling, and the locked room, the blood, the overturned furniture, it all pointed to a puzzle as intricate as any Poirot had ever faced. The family sat in a tense semicircle, their postures rigid, their eyes darting between one another. Alfred, the eldest son, sat closest to the fire, his thin face drawn with worry, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His wife Lydia perched beside him, her delicate features composed, but her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her shawl. George, the pompous politician, puffed on a cigar, his jowls quivering as he muttered about the scandal this would cause in Westminster. His wife, Magdalen, sat primly, her lips pursed, her eyes cold and calculating. David, the sensitive artist, slouched in a corner, his dark eyes burning with a quiet intensity, while his wife Hilda hovered protectively nearby, her plain face etched with concern. Harry, the roguish prodigal son, leaned against the mantelpiece, a smirk playing on his lips, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Pilar Estravados, the exotic granddaughter, sat apart, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her gaze unreadable. And Stephen Farr, the unexpected guest and son of Simeon's late business partner, stood near the window, his handsome face thoughtful as he stared into the snow. Poirot cleared his throat, drawing all eyes to him. "Mes amis," he began, his voice smooth and precise. "We are faced with a crime most extraordinary. A man, locked in his room, his throat cut, no footprints in the snow outside, no sign of entry or exit. Yet, a murderer walked among us last night, and it is my intention, Hercule Poirot, to uncover this person." Alfred shifted uncomfortably. "Surely, Monsieur Poirot, it could have been an outsider, a burglar perhaps who scaled the walls." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Nan, Monsieur Alfred." The snow was undisturbed, the window locked from within. The killer was already inside Gorston Hall, and I believe the key to this mystery lies in the details of the crime itself. He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking on the parquet floor. "Let us consider the scene. The room it was in, disarray furniture overturned, a great crash heard by all. Yet, the door was bolted, the window secure. And then, there is the matter of the diamond-shaped mark on Monsieur Simeon's desk. A curious detail, n'est-ce pas?" George snorted, exhaling a cloud of cigar smoke. "A mark? What's that got to do with anything? The old man was slaughtered like a pig, and you're fussing over scratches on furniture." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The smallest detail, Monsieur George, can be the thread that unravels the tapestry. This mark, it is not random. It speaks to me of purpose, of intent." Lydia's voice, soft but steady, broke the silence. "What do you mean, Monsieur Poirot? What kind of mark?" Poirot turned to her, his expression unreadable. "A diamond, Madame Lydia, etched faintly into the wood. Not deep, not obvious, but deliberate. I asked myself, what does this shape signify? And why was it there, in the room where a man met his end?" The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Pilar tilted her head, her dark eyes narrowing. "Diamonds. My grandfather was in the diamond trade, was he not? In South Africa, long ago." "Precisement, Mademoiselle Pilar," Poirot said, nodding. "And this is why I turn my attention to the past of Monsieur Simeon Lee. The butler Horbury has informed me that your grandfather dealt in uncut diamonds during his time in Johannesburg. A lucrative trade, but one not without its dangers and its secrets." Stephen Farr, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. "That's true. My father worked with Simeon in those days. They were partners, though it didn't end well. Simeon made his fortune, but my father, well, he was left with nothing." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And you, Monsieur Farr, arrive at Gorston Hall at a most convenient moment. A man from the past welcomed warmly by Simeon while his own sons are met with scorn. Tell me, what brought you here?" Stephen met Poirot's eyes without flinching. "Simeon invited me, said he wanted to make amends for old wrongs. I didn't expect to walk into this." Harry chuckled darkly, pushing off the mantelpiece. "Amends, that's rich. The old man never did anything without an angle. He probably brought you here to stir the pot. Stephen, get us all riled up." "Enough, Harry," David snapped, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "You've always been jealous of anyone who got close to father." "Maybe you careful little brother," Harry interrupted, his smirk fading. "You're not exactly the picture of filial devotion yourself. We all heard you raging about father last night." David's face flushed, and Hilda placed a restraining hand on his arm. "David was in our room all evening," she said firmly. "He didn't go near father's study." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Let us not descend into chaos, Miss Amos. Each of you has a motive, a reason to wish Monsieur Simeon harm, but motive alone does not make a murderer. We must look to the facts, to the clues left behind." He turned to the butler Horbury, who hovered near the door, his gaunt face pale. "Monsieur Horbury, you mentioned that Simeon Lee was particular about his study. Did he ever speak of diamonds, or of anything valuable kept there?" Horbury hesitated, his eyes darting to the family. He did mention diamonds, sir, now and then. Said he kept a few from the old days, uncut stones, in a safe, but I never saw them myself." "A safe," Poirot murmured, his eyes gleaming. "And where is this safe, Monsieur Horbury?" "In his study, behind a panel in the wall. But it's locked, sir, and only Mr. Lee had the key." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "Very well, I shall examine this safe. But first I wish to return to the scene of the crime. There is more to learn from that room." The family dispersed reluctantly, their whispers trailing after them as they left the parlor. Poirot, accompanied by Colonel Johnson, who had arrived to oversee the local police's involvement, made his way upstairs to Simeon's study. The room was as they had left it, the air heavy with the metallic temps of dried blood. The overturned chair, the scattered papers, the pool of blood beneath the desket was a scene of chaos. Yet Poirot's eyes were drawn to the smallest details. He knelt by the desk, his fingers tracing the diamond-shaped mark. It was faint, almost invisible unless one knew to look for it, etched into the polished mahogany. "Curious," he murmured. "This mark, it is not accidental. It was made with purpose, perhaps to point to something, or to distract." Colonel Johnson, a stout man with a bristling mustache, frowned. "You think it's a clue, Poirot? Seems like a stretch. Could just be a scratch from years of use." "Non mon ami," Poirot said, shaking his head. "Hercule Poirot does not believe in coincidences. This mark, it is connected to the diamonds, to Simeon's past. I am certain of it." He rose, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on the fireplace. The heavy stone mantel was adorned with ornate carvings, but something caught his eye, a faint smudge on the hearth. He crouched again, his fingers brushing the stone, and his eyes widened as he picked up a tiny, glittering object. It was a chip of uncut diamond, no larger than a grain of sand, but unmistakable in its raw crystalline beauty. "Mon Dieu," Poirot breathed. "A diamond chip, here by the fireplace. This is no accident." Johnson peered over his shoulder. "Blimey, Poirot, you've got sharp eyes. What's it mean?" "It means, mon ami, that the diamonds are at the heart of this crime. This chip, it suggests a struggle, perhaps, or a deliberate planting of evidence. But why here, by the fireplace?" Poirot's mind raced, his little grey cells piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The locked room, the diamond mark, the chip by the fireplace, it all pointed to a carefully orchestrated crime, one designed to mislead. He examined the fireplace more closely, running his fingers along the edges of the stone. His touch lingered on a carved rosette, and with a gentle press he felt a click. A small panel in the hearth shifted, revealing a narrow compartment. Johnson gasped. "Good Lord, Poirot, a secret hiding place." "Precisement," Poirot said, his voice tinged with excitement. "But Hellas, it is empty." He peered into the compartment, finding only dust and a faint metallic scent. "This was meant to hold something, perhaps the diamonds Horbury spoke of, but they are gone, taken by the killer, or hidden elsewhere." Johnson scratched his head. "So, you think the murderer was after the diamonds? Killed old Simeon to get them?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, straightening. "Or perhaps the diamonds are a distraction, a way to mask the true motive. We must consider all possibilities." The rest of the day was spent in meticulous investigation. Poirot questioned the household staff, learning little beyond their fear and confusion. The maid, Tressilian, mentioned again the strange whistle she'd heard before the crash, a detail that nagged at Poirot's mind. He examined the window in Simeon's study, confirming that the lock had been tampered with, though not from the outside. The tampering was subtle, a slight scratch on the latch suggesting it had been manipulated from within the room. As evening fell, Poirot sat alone in the study, the snow still falling outside, casting a ghostly light through the window. He closed his eyes, letting the clues swirl in his mind: the diamond mark, the chip, the tampered lock, the whistle. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. He thought of the family, their motives laid bare: financial dependence, Harry's resentment, George's greed, David's hatred, Pilar's mysterious origins, Stephen's connection to the past, and Lydia. Her quiet demeanor hid something, Poirot was certain. Her mention of a shadowy figure near Simeon's room before the crash was too precise to be dismissed. He rose, his decision made. "The whistle," he murmured. "It is the next thread to pull. It will lead us closer to the truth." Poirot made his way to the servants' quarters, seeking Tressilian. The maid, a nervous woman with a pinched face, was polishing silver in the pantry. "Mademoiselle Tressilian," Poirot said gently, "you spoke of a whistle, heard before the crash. Can you describe it? Was it sharp, low, long, short?" Tressilian frowned, her hands pausing. "It was sharp, sir, like a bird, but not quite quick, too, not drawn out. I thought it odd, coming from upstairs." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. A whistle, sharp and quick, could be a signal, a distraction, or even a mistake by the killer. He thanked Tressilian and returned to the study, his thoughts turning to the phonograph in the attic, a detail he had yet to explore fully. The idea of a sound being used to manipulate the scene intrigued him. Could the whistle be connected to the scream, to the crash? Was it part of a larger deception? As night deepened, Poirot stood by the window, watching the snow fall. The diamond chip, the tampered lock, the whistle, they were all threads in a tapestry of deceit. He felt the weight of the mystery, but also the thrill of the chase. The killer had planned carefully, but no plan was perfect. Somewhere, in the details, lay the truth. He turned from the window, his resolve firm. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we follow the whistle, and we shall see where it leads." The chapter drew to a close with Poirot alone in the study, the fire dying in the hearth, the diamond chip glinting in his hand. The mystery of Gorston Hall was far from solved, but the discovery of the chip in the hidden compartment had given him a foothold. The killer was clever, but Hercule Poirot was cleverer still. And as the snow continued to fall, sealing Gorston Hall in its icy embrace, Poirot knew that the truth was within his grasp. Chapter 6. The whistles echoed. The snow fell heavier now, cloaking Gorston Hall in a muffling shroud that seemed to stifle even the whispers of the secrets it held. Hercule Poirot, his small frame bundled in a thick woolen coat, stood at the base of the grand staircase, his sharp eyes scanning the oak-paneled walls as if they might betray the manor's truths. The events of the previous nights, the crash, the scream, Simeon Lee's lifeless body sprawled in a crimson pool, had left the household in a state of uneasy quiet. Like the calm before a storm, the family, scattered across the manor, avoided each other's gazes, each nursing private fears and suspicions. Poirot, however, was not one to linger in the fog of uncertainty. His mind, as always, was a machine of precision, sifting through the chaos of human motives to find a thread of truth. The strange whistle, mentioned almost in passing by the maid Elsie during her tearful recounting, had lodged itself in Poirot's thoughts. It was an anomaly, a note out of place in the symphony of the murder scene. Elsie, a nervous girl with darting eyes, had described it as faint but piercing, heard just before the crash that drew the household to Simeon's room. "Like a kettle, sir, but sharper," she'd said, twisting her apron. Poirot had nodded, filing the detail away. But now, in the cold light of morning, it beckoned him like a beacon. He began his day by revisiting the murder scene. Simeon's room, still sealed off at Colonel Johnson's insistence, was a study in disarray. The heavy oak desk lay overturned, its papers scattered like fallen leaves. The armchair, once regal, was toppled, its velvet upholstery stained with blood. The fireplace, cold now, gaped like a silent witness. Poirot's eyes lingered on the diamond-shaped mark he'd noted earlier, etched faintly into the desk's surface. It was too deliberate to be accidental, yet its purpose eluded him. He crouched, examining the floor, where the diamond chip he'd found near the fireplace gleamed faintly in his memory. A clue, yes, but to what? The whistle, though, tugged at his focus. He stood, brushing his gloved hands, and turned to the butler Tressilian, who hovered at the door, his face pale and drawn. "Monsieur Tressilian," Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding. "This whistle the maid spoke of, did you hear it?" Tressilian's brow furrowed, his fingers twitching at his side. I'm not certain, sir. There was such a commotion last night, with the crash and all. But now you mention it, I may have heard something odd, perhaps a minute before. I thought it was the wind, maybe, rattling the old pipes." Poirot's moustache twitched. "The wind, you say? Or perhaps something else? Tell me, where might one hear such a sound in this house? A kettle, a pipe, a device of some kind." Tressilian hesitated, then gestured upward. "There's the attic, sir, full of old things, furniture, trunks, bits and bobs from the master's younger days. If something were to make a noise like that, it could be up there. The maids don't go often. It's dusty and cold." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The attic allure. Let us investigate." The climb to the attic was steep, the narrow staircase creaking under Poirot's polished shoes. Tressilian led the way, his lantern casting long shadows across the walls. The air grew colder as they ascended, the scent of dust and mildew thickening. At the top a heavy door groaned as Tressilian pushed it open, revealing a cavernous space, cluttered with relics of Gorston Hall's past. Cobwebs draped over forgotten chairs, and trunks stood like silent sentinels. A faint draught whispered through a cracked window, but Poirot's attention was drawn to a corner where a bulky shape was covered with a faded cloth. He approached, pulling the cloth aside to reveal an ancient phonograph, its horn tarnished but intact. Beside it lay a stack of records, their labels yellowed with age. Poirot's gloved fingers traced the edge of one, lifting it to the light. The label read simply, "Scream." "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his mind racing. He turned to Tressilian. "This device, it is operational." Tressilian shrugged, uncertain. "It's been here for years, sir. The old master used to collect oddities. I don't know if it still works." Poirot wound the phonograph's crank, the mechanism grinding reluctantly to life. He placed the record on the turntable, and with a gentle nudge, the needle scratched across the surface. A moment later a sound filled the attic, a high, piercing whistle, followed by a blood-curdling scream that echoed off the rafters. Tressilian stumbled back, his face ashen. "It is the same," Poirot exclaimed, stopping the machine. "The scream we heard last night, it was not Simeon Lee's, it was this, a recording, designed to deceive." Tressilian's mouth worked, soundlessly. "But why, sir? Why play such a thing?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "To create the illusion of a struggle, to fix the time of the murder in our minds. The killer wished us to believe Simeon died at the moment of the crash and scream, but perhaps he was already dead. This phonograph, it is a key to the murderer's method." He examined the phonograph further, noting its position near a vent that led downward, likely carrying sound to the floors below. The whistle, he reasoned, was an artifact of the recording, a flaw or an intentional signal. But who had set it to play, and how? The attic's dust was disturbed, footprints faint but visible, leading to the vent and back to the door. Someone had been here, and recently. Poirot descended to the main house, his mind churning. The family was gathered in the dining room, their breakfast untouched, the air thick with suspicion. Alfred, pale and rigid, sat beside his wife Lydia, who stared into her tea. Harry, lounging with forced nonchalance, flicked ash from his cigarette. George, pompous as ever, muttered about police incompetence, while his wife Magdalen adjusted her pearls nervously. David, brooding, sketched aimlessly on a napkin, his eyes distant. Pilar, the enigmatic granddaughter, sipped coffee, her dark eyes watching everyone. Stephen Farr, the outsider, stood by the window, his charm subdued by the weight of the morning. Poirot cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Mesdames et messieurs, a question. Last night, before the tragedy, where were you each precisely at the time of the crash?" The room stirred. Alfred spoke first, his voice tight. "I was in the library, reading. Lydia was with me." Lydia nodded, her hands clasped. "Yes, we were together." Harry grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I was out in the garden, having a smoke. Bit cold, but I needed air." George snorted. "I was in my study, going over accounts. Magdalen can confirm I was there." Magdalen hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, he was." David's voice was soft, almost inaudible. "I was in my room, painting. I didn't hear anything until the crash." Pilar tilted her head, her accent lilting. "I was exploring the house. It's so big I got lost in the west wing." Stephen turned from the window, his tone calm. "I was in the billiard room, practicing shots. Alone, I'm afraid." Poirot's mustache quivered as he absorbed their answers. None were airtight, and the attic's proximity to the west wing, where Pilar claimed to be, was particularly intriguing. He excused himself, seeking out Elsie again. The maid, polishing silver in the pantry, jumped when he appeared. "Elsie," Poirot said gently, "this whistle you heard, can you recall anything more? The direction, perhaps?" She bit her lip. "It seemed to come from above, sir, like it was in the walls or the ceiling." Poirot nodded, his suspicions solidifying. The vent from the attic likely amplified the phonograph's sound, carrying to the lower floors. But who had triggered it? The device required someone to start it, and the footprints suggested recent activity. He returned to the attic, examining the floor more closely. The footprints were small, not those of a heavy man like Harry or George, a woman perhaps, or someone light on their feet. He descended again, this time seeking Tressilian, who was polishing the banister with mechanical precision. "Monsieur Tressilian," Poirot said, "you mentioned hearing something odd before the crash. Have you recalled anything else? Footsteps, perhaps, in the attic?" Tressilian froze, his cloth stilling. "Now that you mention it, sir, I did hear something earlier that evening. A creak, like someone moving up there. I thought it was rats. But it was heavier, like steps." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And when was this?" "About an hour before the crash, sir. I was in the hall, preparing for dinner an hour before. Enough time for someone to set the phonograph, perhaps to test it or ensure it was ready." Poirot thanked Tressilian and moved to the library, where he found Colonel Johnson poring over police notes. Colonel Poirot said, "This murder is a puzzle of misdirection. The scream was not real, but a recording from an attic phonograph. The killer wished us to believe the murder happened at the moment of the crash, but I suspect Simeon was killed earlier. The scene staged to confuse us." Johnson's eyebrows rose. "A phonograph? That's devilishly clever. But how did they get in and out of a locked room?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That, mon ami, is the next piece of the puzzle. But first, I must confirm the alibis. Someone was in that attic, and they left their mark." The day wore on, the snow piling higher outside. Poirot interviewed each family member again, probing their stories for cracks. Harry's claim of being in the garden was weakened by the absence of fresh footprints in the snow. Only older tracks, half-buried, remained. George's study was near the main staircase, close enough to slip upstairs unnoticed. David's room was in the east wing, far from the attic, but his distracted demeanor suggested he was hiding something. Pilar's tale of being lost seemed plausible, yet her sharp eyes betrayed a keen awareness of the house's layout. Stephen, the outsider, had no one to corroborate his billiard room alibi, and his connection to Simeon's past made him a figure of interest. Poirot returned to Simeon's room, his mind circling the locked door and window. The window's lock, tampered with from the inside, suggested no one had entered or exited that way. The door, bolted from within, was equally confounding. Yet the phonograph pointed to a staged scene, a performance designed to mislead. He examined the fireplace again, running his fingers along its stone edges. A faint click caught his attention, and he pressed harder, revealing a small lever hidden in the carving. With a low groan, a panel slid open, exposing a narrow passage. Poirot's heart quickened. He stepped inside, the air musty and tight. The passage wound upward, emerging in the attic near the phonograph. Here was the answer to the locked room, a secret way in and out, known to someone in the house. The footprints in the attic matched the passage's dusty floor, confirming the killer's route. He emerged, dusting his coat, and sought out Tressilian once more. "This passage," Poirot said. "Who knew of it?" Tressilian's eyes widened. "It's an old house, sir. The master mentioned it once, years ago, said it was built for servants to move unseen. But I don't know who else might have known." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The passage explained the killer's access, but the phonograph suggested premeditation. Someone had planned this murder carefully, using the scream to mask the true time of death. He gathered the family again, this time in the parlor, where a fire crackled uneasily. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began. "The scream we heard was no cry of anguish, but a recording, played from the attic to deceive us. The killer used a phonograph to create the illusion of a struggle at the moment of the crash. But I believe Simeon Lee was killed earlier. The scene arranged to mislead. Tell me, who among you has knowledge of such devices?" The family exchanged glances, their faces a mix of confusion and fear. Harry laughed nervously. "A phonograph? That's absurd. Who'd go to such trouble?" Pilar's eyes narrowed. "In Spain, we use simpler methods. This sounds like an Englishman's trick." David's pencil snapped in his hand. "You're saying someone staged it all? That's monstrous." Poirot watched their reactions, noting every flinch, every glance. The killer was among them, and the phonograph was their misstep. He excused himself, returning to the attic to examine the footprints again. They were small, but not definitively. Female perhaps, a man with narrow feet, or someone wearing borrowed shoes. The vent near the phonograph was key. It had carried the sound downward, amplifying the deception. As night fell, Poirot sat in his guest room, sketching a timeline. Simeon's death, the crash, the scream, all orchestrated to confuse. The passage and phonograph were tools of a cunning mind, but whose? He recalled Lydia's calm demeanor, Alfred's nervous loyalty, Harry's sly grin, George's bluster, David's quiet rage, Pilar's guarded charm, and Stephen's calculated ease. Each had motive, each had opportunity, but only one had the ingenuity to stage such a scene. He rose, pacing. The whistle was the key, a signal or a mistake. Tomorrow, he would test the phonograph again, perhaps recreate the sound in the family's presence to gauge their reactions. For now, he noted one final detail: the faint scent of polish in the attic, not unlike that used by the maids. Had someone cleaned the phonograph recently, ensuring it worked, or was it another misdirection? The chapter closed with Poirot standing at his window, staring into the snow-swept night. The whistle's echo lingered in his mind, a haunting reminder that the truth was close, hidden in the shadows of Gorston Hall. He murmured to himself, "The killer has played their hand, but Poirot, he sees the cards." Chapter 7. The shadows trailed. The snow fell heavier now, cloaking Gorston Hall in a shroud of white that muffled the world outside. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, each creak of the ancient manor amplifying the tension among its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his small, meticulous frame a stark contrast to the towering portraits of Lee ancestors glaring down from the walls. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the room where the family had gathered earlier. That morning their faces etched with unease after the discovery of Simeon Lee's brutal murder. The locked room, the scream, the absence of footprints in the snow all pointed to a puzzle that demanded his little gray cells work at their finest. Now, with the revelation of the strange whistle and the phonograph in the attic, Poirot's mind churned with possibilities. The shadowy figure Lydia had mentioned seeing near Simeon's room before the crash was the next thread to tug. Poirot adjusted his scarf, a habit born of precision rather than cold, and made his way to the staircase. The oak banister gleamed under the chandelier's light, its crystals casting fleeting rainbows across the walls. Colonel Johnson, the local chief of police and Poirot's friend, had reluctantly agreed to let him lead the investigation, though his men were stationed outside, their boots crunching in the snow as they guarded the perimeter. A locked room, Poirot Johnson had muttered earlier, his moustache twitching. No one in, no one out. It's impossible. But Poirot had only smiled, his eyes glinting with the thrill of the impossible. He began with Lydia Alfred's wife, whose quiet demeanor hid a keen observance. She sat in the drawing room, her hands folded in her lap, her delicate features framed by a high-collared dress of deep green. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows that danced across her face. Poirot noted the slight tremble in her fingers as she recounted her story. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I couldn't sleep that night. The air felt heavy, as if something terrible was coming. I stepped into the corridor to clear my head, and that's when I saw a figure, just a silhouette, moving near Simeon's door. It was quick, almost like a ghost, and then it was gone." Poirot leaned forward, his hands clasped. "This figure, madame, can you describe it further? The height, the build, perhaps the manner of movement?" Lydia's brow furrowed. "It was tall, I think, slender, maybe, but the light was dim, and it moved so fast. I thought it might have been one of the men, Harry, perhaps, or Stephen, but I couldn't be sure." "And you heard nothing? No sound, no whisper?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the fire. "There was a faint rustle, like fabric brushing against the wall, but nothing else. I went back to my room and didn't think much of it until until the scream." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. The rustle could indicate a cloak or coat, perhaps someone attempting stealth, but the corridor was wide, and the walls were bare save for a few tapestries. A brush against them would require carelessness or intent. He thanked Lydia and moved on, his polished shoes clicking on the polished floor as he headed to Sim's room. The murder scene remained untouched. Per Poirot's orders, the heavy oak door, now unbolted, hung slightly ajar, revealing the chaos within. Furniture lay toppled, a velvet-upholstered chair on its side, a small table, splintered papers, scattered like leaves in a storm. The pool of blood had darkened, staining the Persian rug beneath Simeon's body, which had been removed for examination. Poirot's eyes swept the room, lingering on the fireplace. The diamond-shaped mark on Simeon's desk had led to the discovery of a diamond chip, but now his attention was drawn to the hearth itself. The fireplace was wide, its stonework ancient, with intricate carvings of vines and flowers. Something about its symmetry felt off. He knelt, ignoring the faint ache in his knees, and ran his fingers along the stone. The carvings were smooth, worn by time, but one section, a small circular flower at the base, protruded slightly. Poirot pressed it, and with a soft click, a panel slid open, revealing a narrow passage. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light that followed him as he peered inside. The passage was cramped, barely wide enough for a man to pass, its walls rough and unadorned. It sloped upward, toward the attic. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his breath visible in the cold air. "The locked room is no longer locked." He retrieved a lantern from the butler, Tressilian, who hovered nearby, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, I've served this family for 30 years, and I never knew such a passage existed," Tressilian said, his voice trembling. "What does it mean?" "It means, my friend, that the killer did not need wings to enter or leave," Poirot replied, his tone calm but firm. "But we must tread carefully. The truth is close, yet it hides in the shadows." The passage was a revelation, but it raised new questions. Who knew of its existence, and how had they accessed it without being seen? Poirot followed the passage, his lantern casting flickering shadows. It wound upward, its stone steps worn smooth by forgotten feet, until it emerged in the attic, near the phonograph he had discovered earlier. The attic was a cavernous space, filled with trunks, cobwebs, and the faint smell of mildew. The phonograph sat on a crate, its horn gleaming dully in the lantern's light. Nearby, the floorboards creaked underfoot, and Poirot noticed faint scuff marks, evidence of recent movement. He returned to the main house, his mind racing. The passage explained the footsteps Tressilian had heard, but it also suggested premeditation. The killer had planned their approach, using the phonograph to stage the scream and the passage to bypass the locked door. But why the elaborate ruse, and who had the knowledge and the nerve to execute it? The family gathered for lunch, their faces a gallery of strain. Alfred, loyal but weary, sat rigidly beside Lydia, his eyes darting to his brothers. Harry, the roguish second son, lounged with a forced nonchalance. his grin masking a flicker of unease. George, pompous and red-faced, muttered about the inconvenience of the police presence. David, the sensitive artist, stared at his plate, his hands clenched. Pilar, the enigmatic granddaughter, toyed with a silver bracelet, her dark eyes unreadable. Stephen Farr, the outsider, sat apart, his charm subdued by the weight of suspicion. Poirot observed them from the end of the table, his presence a quiet force. "Mes amis," he began, his voice cutting through the clink of cutlery. The murder of Monsieur Simeon Lee was no act of impulse. It was a performance, staged with care. The scream, the locked room, the chaos all were designed to mislead. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived. A murmur rippled through the room. Harry leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What are you saying, Poirot? That one of us planned this this charade?" "Precisely," Poirot replied, his gaze steady. "And the key lies in the shadows, both literal and figurative." Madame Lydia saw a figure near the door. The attic held a phonograph that mimicked a scream. "And now, I have found a passage that connects the murder room to the house's heart. The killer walked among you, unseen." Pilar's bracelet clinked as she set down her fork. "You're saying someone crept through the walls like a rat?" "That's absurd, is it?" Poirot countered, his tone mild but piercing. "The passage is real, mademoiselle, and it was used." The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire. George sputtered, "This is outrageous. Are you accusing us all?" "Not all, Monsieur George," Poirot said, "but one, or perhaps two." The accusation hung in the air, and Poirot watched their reactions. Alfred's face paled, Lydia's fingers tightened, Harry's grin faltered, David's eyes widened, and Pilar's lips parted slightly. Stephen, however, remained impassive, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. After lunch, Poirot sought out Harry, whose roguish charm made him a likely candidate for bold moves. They walked in the snow-covered garden, the crunch of their steps the only sound. Harry lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the frosty air. "Poirot, you're barking up the wrong tree if you think I'd kill the old man," Harry said, exhaling. "Sure, I hated his guts. He cut me off years ago, called me a disgrace, but I'm no killer." "Yet you were in the garden that night," Poirot said, his eyes fixed on Harry's face. "And you know the house well now, and perhaps better than you let on." Harry's laugh was sharp. "You think I found some secret tunnel and slit his throat? Come off it. I was outside, smoking, trying to avoid another row with Alfred, and you saw nothing. No one moving near the house." Harry hesitated, his eyes flicking to the manor's upper windows. "I saw a light, maybe in the attic. Thought it was a servant, but it went out quick." Poirot filed this away. A light in the attic could confirm the killer's presence, but Harry's hesitation suggested he was holding back or lying. Next, Poirot spoke with David, whose sensitivity made him volatile. They sat in the library, surrounded by leather-bound books and the faint scent of old paper. David's hands trembled as he spoke of his father's cruelty. "He drove her to her death. You know," David said, his voice low, "my mother, he mocked her, humiliated her, until she couldn't take it. I hated him for it." "Enough to kill Monsieur David?" Poirot asked gently. David's eyes flashed. "I wanted to. God help me, I did. But I was in my room, painting. I heard the crash, the scream, and I ran to his door like the others." Poirot noted the passion in David's voice, the raw edge of grief. But passion could mask deception, and David's alibi was As the evening fell, Poirot returned to the passage, determined to uncover more. He crawled through the narrow space, his lantern illuminating cobwebs and dust. At the fireplace's entrance, he examined the lever cleverly hidden mechanism disguised as a carving required strength to operate, suggesting the killer was no weakling. Near the lever he found something new, a blood-stained glove, its leather worn but unmistakably male in size. It was tucked into a crevice, as if hastily hidden. Poirot held the glove to the light, his heart quickening. "Voila," he whispered, "the shadow leaves a trace." He brought the glove to Colonel Johnson, who was sipping tea in the study. "Poirot, this changes everything," Johnson said, turning the glove over. "It's too large for a woman." One of the men, "Then, perhaps," Poirot said, his tone cautious. "But we must not leap to conclusions. The glove may belong to the killer, or it may be another piece of the performance." That night, the family gathered in the parlor, their faces pale under the candlelight. Poirot stood before them, the glove in his hand. "This was found in the passage," he said, holding it up. "It is stained with blood. It is a man's glove, and it tells me that the killer was not alone in their planning." A gasp escaped Lydia, and Harry swore under his breath. George blustered. "This is preposterous. You can't accuse us based on a glove." "I accuse no one yet," Poirot said. "But I warn you, the truth is near, and Hercule Poirot will find it." The chapter closed with the family dispersing, their footsteps echoing in the silent hall. Poirot stood by the fire, the glove in his pocket, his mind racing. The passage, the glove, the shadow pointed to a killer who moved with cunning, but the scent of perfume, faint but unmistakable, lingered in his memory. Was there an accomplice, and if so, who? The snow continued to fall, burying Gorston Hall in silence. But Poirot knew the truth was no longer hidden in the shadows, it was waiting to be unveiled. Chapter 8. Motives unraveled. The snow continued to fall outside Gorston Hall, blanketing the estate in a deceptive calm that belied the storm of suspicion brewing within its walls. Hercule Poirot, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the early hour, stood in the grand library, his sharp eyes scanning the shelves as if they might yield secrets as readily as the family members he intended to interrogate. The morning light filtered through the heavy velvet curtains, casting long shadows across the room where the air was thick with the scent of old leather and wax polish. Colonel Johnson, his friend and the local chief constable, had joined him. His ruddy face etched with concern over the murder of Simeon Lee Poirot, Johnson said, rubbing his hands together as if to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. This family is a nest of vipers. Every one of them had reason to want the old man dead. But how do we pin it down? That locked room, the scream, the missing diamonds, it's a devil of a puzzle. Poirot nodded, his expression serene yet alert, like a cat watching a mouse. Mon ami, the puzzle is complex, but the human heart is more so. Each member of this family carries a motive, and it is in their words, their glances, their silences, that we shall find the truth. Let us begin with the past, for it is there that the seeds of this crime were sown. The library door creaked open, and Alfred Lee, the eldest son, entered, his face pale and drawn. He wore a somber suit, his tie knotted with precision, but his eyes betrayed a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights. Poirot gestured for him to sit, his movements deliberate and courteous. Monsieur Alfred, Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet, you were devoted to your father, n'est-ce pas? Yet devotion can be a heavy burden when it is not reciprocated. Tell me, what was your relationship with Simeon Lee truly like? Alfred's hands clenched on the arms of the chair. I stayed by his side, he said, his voice low but steady. Unlike my brothers, I never left Gorston Hall. I managed his affairs, kept the estate running, ensured his comfort. He was difficult, yes, but he was my father. I owed him my loyalty. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. Loyalty, yes, but also dependence. The estate, the wealth, it is all tied to your father's will, is it not? And he hinted at changing it. Did this not cause you disquiet? Alfred's jaw tightened, and for a moment his composure faltered. He was always threatening to change the will. It was his way of keeping us in line. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're suggesting. I was in the dining room when we heard the crash. Poirot made a small non-committal sound, jotting a note in his pocketbook. Merci, Monsieur Alfred, you may go, but reflect, if you please, on whether loyalty can turn to resentment when it is taken for granted. As Alfred left, his shoulders stiff, Poirot turned to Johnson. He is loyal, yes, but loyalty stretched thin can snap. We must consider if his devotion masked a deeper frustration. Next came Harry Lee, the prodigal son, whose roguish charm filled the room like a gust of wind. He lounged in the chair, one leg crossed over the other, his grin defiant. So, Poirot, you think I bumped off the old man? I won't lie, didn't shed tears when I heard he was dead. He was a tyrant, and I was glad to be free of him years ago. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. Yet you returned, Monsieur Harry, when he summoned you. Why was it love for your father or the promise of his fortune? Harry's grin faded slightly. Let's say I was curious. The old man never did anything without a reason. When he called us all back, I figured he was up to something, maybe a new will, maybe just stirring the pot for his own amusement. But I didn't need his money. I've done well enough on my own. Indeed. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Yet, you were seen in the garden near the time of the murder, were you not? A curious place to be on a cold Christmas Eve. Harry shrugged, unperturbed. I needed air. The house was stifling. All that family tension. I didn't hear anything until the crash, and by then it was too late. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. And what of the passage we found, Monsieur Harry? The one behind the fireplace. You are a man of adventure. Perhaps you explored such hidden corners of Gorston Hall. Harry's eyes flickered, but he laughed. You're a sharp one, Poirot. I'll admit, I knew about the passage. Used to play in it as a boy. But I didn't use it to kill anyone. I was outside, like I said. As Harry sauntered out, Poirot murmured to Johnson, he is too confident. This one, his charm is a mask. But for what? Guilt, or merely bravado? George Lee, the pompous politician, was next, his face flushed with indignation as he entered. This is outrageous, Poirot. To be questioned like a common criminal in my own father's house. I'm a member of Parliament, a man of standing. Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. And yet, Monsieur George, even men of standing have motives. Your father's wealth supports your, how shall we say, extravagant lifestyle. A change in his will would be most inconvenient. Nah, George sputtered, his hands waving dismissively. I didn't need his money, my career's flourishing. But yes, he was a cruel old man, always dangling the inheritance over us like a sword. I was in the library, reading, when he was killed. I heard nothing until the scream. Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping his pocketbook. A library is a quiet place, Monsieur George, yet a man so close to the scene of a crime might hear something, a whistle, perhaps. George's eyes widened briefly before he recovered a whistle. Nonsense, I heard no such thing. You're grasping at straws, Poirot. When George left, Poirot turned to Johnson. He protests too much. This one. His greed is palpable, but is it enough to drive him to murder? David Lee, the sensitive artist, entered next, his face pale and his eyes haunted. He sat stiffly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I know what you're thinking, he said before Poirot could speak. You think I hated my father enough to kill him, and you're not entirely wrong. He was a monster. He drove my mother to her death with his cruelty. I've never forgiven him for that. Poirot's expression softened, but his gaze remained sharp. Hatred is a powerful motive, Monsieur David, and you were in your room, alone, when the murder occurred. No one can confirm your whereabouts, can they? David's eyes flashed with pain. I was painting. I often paint at night. It helps me think. I didn't hear the crash until everyone else did. I swear it. Poirot leaned back, studying David's trembling hands. Your mother's memory weighs heavily on you. Did you seek to avenge her? Perhaps to end the pain your father caused? David's voice broke. I wanted him gone. Yes, but I didn't kill him. I couldn't. I'm not that kind of man. As David left, Poirot sighed. His pain is genuine, Colonel, but pain can drive a man to desperate acts. We must not dismiss him. The enigmatic Pilar Estravados entered next, her dark eyes wary yet defiant. She wore a deep red dress that seemed out of place in the somber manner, her movements graceful but guarded. You wish to know about me, Senor Poirot, she said, her accent thick but her English flawless. I am only a granddaughter, here to claim what is mine. I did not know my grandfather well, but he invited me. Why should I wish him dead? Poirot's smile was almost paternal. Mademoiselle, you are a mystery in this house of secrets. Your mother, Simeon's daughter, died under questionable circumstances, did she not? And your claim to the inheritance, how certain are you of it? Pilar's chin lifted. My mother was his daughter, and he acknowledged me. I have papers to prove it. As for where I was lost in this maze of a house when he died. I heard the scream and came running. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Papers can be forged, mademoiselle, and a lost granddaughter so conveniently arrived might have much to gain from a man's death. Pilar's gaze did not waver. Think what you like, Senna. I am no murderer. As she left, Poirot murmured to Johnson, she is clever. This one, too clever. Perhaps we must verify her story. Finally, Stephen Farr, the outsider, entered, his easy smile contrasting with the tension in the room. Poirot, I'm not even family. Why am I here? Simeon invited me. Sure, but I barely knew him. I'm just the son of his old partner, come to pay my respects. Poirot's voice was deceptively mild. And yet, Monsieur Farr, your father's partnership with Simeon ended badly, did it not? A matter of diamonds, perhaps a fortune stolen, a family ruined. Stephen's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. Ancient history. My father lost everything, true, but I've made those way. I was in the billiard room, playing a solitary game, when the murder happened. I didn't hear a thing until the commotion. Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. A solitary game, in a house full of people. Curious. And what of your father's diamonds? Did Simeon ever speak of them? Stephen shrugged. He mentioned them once, said they were long gone. I didn't press. I'm not here for revenge, Poirot. As Stephen left, Poirot turned to Johnson. He is too smooth. This Monsieur Farr, his calm is a mask, but for what purpose? We must dig deeper. The interviews complete, Poirot and Johnson retired to the drawing room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Poirot paced, his mind racing. Each of them has a motive. Colonel Alfred's dependence, Harry's resentment, George's greed, David's hatred, Pilar's ambition, Stephen's past. But motives alone do not make a murderer. We must look to the clues: a phonograph, the passage, the glove, the diamond chip. Johnson frowned. The glove, Poirot, it's a man's. You said, that rules out Pilar and the wives, doesn't it? Poirot shook his head. Not necessarily. A glove can be worn by anyone, or planted to mislead. We must consider all possibilities. And the perfume I detected in the passage, faint, but distinct. It was not Pilar's, nor Lydia's, nor any of the men's cologne. It suggests an accomplice, or perhaps a deliberate red herring. The day wore on, and Poirot requested a meeting with the butler Tressilian, whose long service at Gorston Hall made him a repository of family secrets. The old man entered, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his spectacles. Monsieur Poirot, I've told you all I know. I heard footsteps in the attic. Yes, but I thought nothing of it until the murder. Poirot's eyes softened, but his questions were precise. Tressilian, you knew Simeon Lee better than most. His dealings in diamonds, tell me of them. Were there any left in the house? Tressilian hesitated, then nodded. He kept some, sir, uncut stones, from his days in South Africa. He was proud of them, showed them to me once, years ago. Kept them in that safe, I believe. But after his death, you said the safe was empty. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Empty, yes, but the diamond chip near the fireplace suggests otherwise. And what of Stephen Farr's father? Did Simeon ever speak of him? Tressilian's face darkened. Only in passing, sir. He said Mr. Farr was a fool, too trusting. said he'd got what he deserved. Harsh words, but that was Mr. Lee's way. Poirot nodded, dismissing Tressilian with a thoughtful expression. The past is a shadow over this house, Colonel. Simeon's sins have come home to roost. As evening fell, Poirot gathered the family in the grand parlor, the same room where Simeon had taunted them days before. The air was heavy with anticipation, the Christmas decorations holly wreaths, twinkling lights mocking the grim mood. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his small stature commanding the room. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice clear and resonant. We are close to unraveling the mystery of Simeon Lee's death, but to do so we must recreate the night of the murder. I ask you to listen carefully. He produced the phonograph from the attic, setting it on a table. With a nod to Johnson, he played the record labeled Scream. The eerie cry filled the room, and the family reacted visibly. Harry's jaw tightened, George shifted uncomfortably. David paled, Pilar's eyes narrowed, and Stephen's smile froze. Lydia, sitting quietly, clutched her handkerchief, her face impassive. Poirot stopped the record, his gaze sweeping the room. This scream was not your father's, but a clever trick to mislead us. The killer used this to create the illusion of a struggle, to confuse the timeline. But your reactions, they tell me much. One of you knows more than you admit. The family erupted in protests, accusations flying. Harry pointed at Pilar. She's not even family. She's here for the money, nothing else. Pilar's eyes flashed. And you, Harry, skulking in the garden, hiding in passages. You're no saint. George pounded the table. This is absurd. I was in the library, I tell you. David's voice was quiet but bitter. He deserved to die, but I didn't do it. Stephen raised his hands. I'm an outsider here. Why would I risk everything? Lydia said nothing, her eyes fixed on the floor. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. Enough, the truth is near, but we must be patient. Tomorrow we shall set a trap to catch our killer. For now rest if you can. As the family dispersed, Poirot lingered by the fireplace, his fingers tracing the diamond-shaped mark on the mantel. The truth is here, Colonel, he murmured. In the shadows, in the motives, in the clues. Tomorrow we shall see it clearly. The chapter closed with the snow falling silently outside, the manor's secrets buried beneath its icy veil, and Poirot's mind racing toward the final revelation. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The snow fell heavier now, cloaking Gorston Hall in a suffocating blanket of white, as if nature itself conspired to bury the secrets within its walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand parlor, his small, precise figure, a stark contrast to the opulent chaos of the room-gilded mirrors, reflecting the flicker of candlelight, velvet drapes heavy with dust, and the faint scent of pine from a wilting Christmas tree. The family, summoned by his command, sat in a semicircle, their faces a gallery of suspicion, fear, and barely concealed resentment. Alfred, rigid as ever, clutched his wife Lydia's hand, though her eyes remained fixed on the floor. Harry lounged, with affected nonchalance, one leg crossed over the other, but his fingers drummed a nervous rhythm on the armrest. George, red-faced and pompous, adjusted his spectacles repeatedly, while his wife Magdalen dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. David, pale and trembling, sat apart, his artist's hands clenched into fists. Pilar, the enigmatic granddaughter, leaned forward, her dark eyes glinting with curiosity. And Stephen Farr, the outsider, stood by the fireplace, his charming smile replaced by a wary frown. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for Poirot to shatter the fragile truce. Monsieur et Madame Poirot began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. I have called you here, because the truth, it is close. The murderer of Simeon Lee is among us, and tonight, I shall lay a trap to catch them. A collective gasp rippled through the room. George sputtered. This is outrageous. You can't accuse us like this. Magdalen stifled a sob, and Harry's drumming fingers froze. Lydia's head snapped up, her pale face betraying a flicker of something, fear perhaps, or defiance. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the protests. His mustache twitched slightly, a sign of his quiet satisfaction at their unease. The method of this murder, he continued, pacing slowly before the hearth, is a masterpiece of deception. The locked room, the scream, the crash, all designed to mislead. But Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily fooled. The clues, the diamond chip, the phonograph, the hidden passage, the blood-stained glove, they point to a mind both cunning and desperate. And now, I have one final test to unmask the guilty. He paused, letting his words sink in, his dark eyes scanning each face. Alfred's loyalty to his father had always seemed unshakable, yet his financial dependence was a chain that chafed. Harry's roguish charm masked a lifetime of grudges. His recent return to Gorston Hall suspiciously timed with Simeon's talk of a new will. George's greed was palpable, his pompous demeanor a thin veil over his fear of disinheritance. Hatred for his father burned quietly, fueled by years of cruelty that had broken his mother's spirit. Pilar, with her exotic allure and questionable origins, remained an enigma, her motives as murky as her past. And Stephen Farr, the charming interloper, carried the weight of his father's betrayal by Simeon, a motive that could turn to vengeance. Even the servants, the butler Tressilian and the maid Horbury, had been too close to the crime to be dismissed entirely. Poirot's gaze lingered on the safe, now repaired after its earlier violation, its black iron surface gleaming dully in the firelight. This safe, he said, once held something of great value, something worth killing for. Tonight I have placed within it an object, a diamond, uncut, from Monsieur Lee's collection. But this diamond, it is not what it seems. It is a trap, rigged with a mechanism to alert me if the safe is opened. The one who seeks to steal it will reveal themselves as the one who sought to gain from Simeon Lee's death. The family exchanged uneasy glances. Pilar's lips parted as if to speak, but she thought better of it. Stephen shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing. David's fists tightened, and Lydia's hand slipped from Alfred's, her fingers trembling slightly. Poirot noted every reaction, his mind cataloguing the subtle tells, the quickened breath, the averted gaze, the unconscious clench of a jaw. "We'll all remain here," Poirot instructed, "under the watch of Colonel Johnson, who has kindly agreed to assist me tonight. I shall retire to my room, but rest assured, I will know the moment my trap is sprung." With a slight bow, he left the parlor, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall as he ascended the staircase. In his room, Poirot did not sleep. He sat at a small desk, a single candle casting long shadows across the walls. His trap was simple, but ingenious, a tiny bell, concealed within the safe, connected by a fine wire to a device in his room. If the safe's door was opened, the bell would ring, and he would know. He had chosen a diamond as bait, knowing it would tempt the killer, whose motive likely tied to Simeon's fortune in uncut gems. The diamond chip found near the fireplace, the mark on Simeon's desk, and Stephen's connection to South African mines all pointed to diamonds as the heart of the crime. But Poirot knew the killer's greed was only part of the story. There was something deeper, a personal wound that had driven them to such a brutal act. The hours ticked by, the silence of Gorston Hall broken only by the occasional creak of the old manor settling under the snows. Wait. Poirot's eyes never left the bell, his mind turning over the clues like pieces of a mosaic. The phonograph in the attic, with its chilling record labeled "Scream," had been a stroke of genius, masking the true timing of Simeon's death. The hidden passage behind the fireplace, accessible only by a concealed lever, explained how the killer had entered and exited the locked room. The blood-stained glove, found in the passage, suggested a male culprit, its size too large for a woman's hand. Yet something nagged at Poirot, a detail that didn't quite fit. The glove was a clue, yes, but was it too obvious? A plan to mislead him. His fingers tapped lightly on the desk, his little gray cells working furiously. Precisely 2:17 a.m., the bell rang, a sharp, insistent chime that shattered the silence. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his cane in hand, moving with surprising agility for a man of his stature. He descended the stairs, his heart pounding not with fear but with the thrill of the chase. The parlor was empty, the family, presumably, in their rooms, but the safe's door stood ajar, its contents undisturbed except for the fake diamond, which now lay on the floor. As if dropped in haste, footsteps echoed from the hall, and Poirot turned to see Colonel Johnson, his face grim. "I heard it too," Johnson whispered. "Someone's in the study." They moved swiftly, their shadows merging with the manor's gloom. The study door was slightly open, and inside Poirot saw a figure bent over Simeon's desk, their back to the door. The figure straightened, startled, as Poirot flicked on the light. It was George Lee. George's face was flushed, his spectacles askew, his hands clutching a small velvet pouch. "Monsieur Lee," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the tension. "You have been caught, as the English say, red-handed." "This isn't what it looks like," George stammered, his voice rising. "I only wanted to secure my inheritance. Father was going to change the will, cut me out entirely. I heard about the diamond and I thought if I could take it, I'd have something, anything, to show for all these years of groveling." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And so, you opened the safe. But tell me, monsieur, did you also open it the night your father was murdered? Did you take what was inside then, as you tried to tonight?" "No," George's voice cracked. "I swear, I didn't kill him. I'm not a murderer. I'm just desperate." He sank into a chair, his pompous facade crumbling. Magdalene appeared in the doorway, her face pale, clutching her shawl. "George, what have you done?" she whispered. Poirot held up a hand, silencing her. "Monsieur George, your desperation is noted, but it does not clear you. The safe was emptied before, its contents stolen. If not you, then who?" He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "And why, if you are innocent, did you not speak of this desperation sooner?" George buried his face in his hands, muttering incoherently about debts and disgrace. Poirot turned to Johnson, who nodded and escorted George to the parlor, where the rest of the family was now gathering, roused by the commotion. Their faces were a mix of shock and accusation, but Poirot's attention was elsewhere. He returned to the study, his eyes scanning the room. Something was off. A faint scent, barely perceptible, lingered in the air, perfume floral and delicate, yet unmistakable. It was not George's scent, nor Magdalen's. It was familiar, though a clue that tugged at the edges of his memory. He re-entered the parlor where the family waited, their nerves frayed. Harry stood, his arms crossed, his usual smirk replaced by a scowl. So, George is the killer. Always knew he was a greedy bastard. Silence, Monsieur Harry Poirot said sharply. The trap has revealed much, but not all. There is another piece to this puzzle, one that I have only now begun to see. He turned to the butler Tressilian, who hovered nervously by the door. Monsieur Tressilian, you mentioned footsteps in the attic before the murder. Did you also notice anything unusual in the days leading up to Christmas Eve? A scent, perhaps, in the halls? Tressilian hesitated, his wrinkled face creasing further. Well, sir, now that you mention it, there was a perfume faint like in the upper hall near the master's room. I thought it was Miss Pilar's, but I couldn't be sure. Pilar head snapped up, her dark eyes flashing. I don't wear perfume, she said sharply. It's too bourgeois. Poirot's mustache twitched again. Merci, mademoiselle. That is most interesting. He turned to the family, his voice steady but commanding. The scent of perfume. It is a subtle clue, but it betrays the presence of someone who was not where they claimed to be. The killer. They used the hidden passage to enter Simeon Lee's room, but they left behind more than a glove. They left a trace of themselves, a trace that lingers still. Lydia's hand went to her throat, her fingers brushing a delicate silver locket. Poirot's eyes locked onto her, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy with unspoken truth. Madame Lydia, he said softly, you have been most quiet tonight. Tell me, do you wear perfume? Her lips parted but no sound came. Alfred stood, his face pale. Leave her alone, Poirot. She's done nothing. But Poirot's gaze did not waver. Madame, the glove found in the passage. It is too large for your hand, but the perfume, it is yours, is it not? A floral note, delicate, yet unmistakable. I smelled it in the passage tonight, and I smelled it before, near the fireplace in Simeon's room. Lydia's eyes widened, and for the first time, her composure cracked. I don't know what you mean, she whispered, but her voice trembled. Poirot stepped closer, his tone gentle but relentless. You see, madame, the glove was a clever misdirection. It pointed to a man, Harry, perhaps, or George, but it was placed there deliberately. The true killer needed no glove, for they knew the passage well. They knew the phonograph, the scream, the lever. They knew how to stage a murder that would confound us all, and they wore perfume, a scent that betrays their presence in places they should not have been. The room was silent, every eye on Lydia. Alfred's face was a mask of horror, his loyalty to his wife warring with a dawning realization. Harry's scowl deepened, and Pilar leaned forward, her curiosity now tinged with fear. Stephen's hand rested on the mantel, his knuckles white. David's trembling had stopped, replaced by a strange stillness, as if he, too, sensed the truth. Poirot continued, his voice a quiet thunder. The trap was not only for the safe, madame, it was for you. The bell rang, yes, but it was not George who betrayed himself. It was you, lingering in the shadows, watching, waiting. You knew that diamond was a lure, but you could not resist ensuring it was safe, could you? Your scent, it followed you, and it has led me to you. Lydia's locket slipped from her fingers, falling to the floor with a soft clink. She stood, her small frame trembling, her eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and despair. You think you know everything, Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low but steady. But you don't know what it was like living under his cruelty, his taunts, his endless control. He broke us all, piece by piece. I did what I had to do for Alfred, for all of us. Alfred gasped, stepping back as if struck. Lydia. No, Poirot nodded, his expression one of sorrow rather than triumph. Madame, you are correct. Simeon Lee was a tyrant, a man who wielded his power like a weapon. But murder, it is not the answer. You used the phonograph to stage the scream, the passage to enter and leave, the glove to mislead. The diamond chip, you planted it, did you not, to suggest a theft gone wrong? But your perfume, it was your undoing. Lydia's shoulders slumped, and she sank back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. The family stared, stunned, as Colonel Johnson stepped forward, his face grim. Lydia Lee, you're under arrest, he said quietly, but she did not resist. Poirot turned away, his eyes on the snow falling outside, a veil of white over the darkness of Gorston Hall. The trap had worked, not as he had planned, but as his intuition had hoped. The perfume, the final clue, had unraveled the deception, revealing a killer driven not by greed but by years of quiet suffering. He felt no joy in this victory, only the weight of justice, heavy as the snow that buried the manor's secrets. The family dispersed silently, their accusations and defenses fading into the night. Harry admitted to exploring the passage, drawn by curiosity about his father's secrets, but denied any role in the murder. George's greed had led him to the safe, but he was no killer. Pilar's identity remained questionable, but her part in the crime was peripheral, a distraction orchestrated by Harry to muddy the waters. Stephen, too, was innocent, his motives tied to his father's betrayal but not to murder. David's hatred, while real, had not driven him to act. It was Lydia, the quiet, unassuming wife, who had carried the weight of Simeon's cruelty until it broke her. As the clock struck 3, Poirot stood alone in the parlor, the fire dying in the hearth. The bell, the diamond, the perfume all had played their part. Gorston Hall was silent now, its secrets laid bare. Tomorrow he would leave, but tonight he allowed himself a moment of reflection. Justice had been served, but at what cost? The festive glow of the Christmas tree mocked the tragedy that had unfolded, a reminder that even in the season of light, darkness could prevail. He straightened his tie, adjusted his hat, and stepped into the hall, ready to face the cold dawn of Christmas Day. Chapter 10. The Christmas Revelation. The snow fell in soft, relentless flakes outside Gorston Hall, blanketing the sprawling estate in a silence that seemed to hush even the most restless spirits within. Inside, the grand hall glowed with the festive warmth of Christmas Day, its high ceilings adorned with garlands of holly and ivy, the chandelier casting prisms of light across the polished oak floor. A towering Christmas tree stood in the corner, its branches heavy with ornaments that glinted like stars, though the festive cheer it was meant to inspire felt hollow. The family, summoned by Hercule Poirot, gathered in a semicircle around the hearth, their faces a gallery of apprehension, suspicion, and barely concealed dread. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the very walls of Gorston Hall held their breath, waiting for the truth to unravel. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, fastidious figure an incongruous contrast to the grandeur around him. His black patent leather shoes gleamed, his mustache was impeccably waxed, and his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, darted from one face to another. Colonel Johnson, his friend and the local chief constable, stood by his side, arms crossed, his weathered face betraying a mix of curiosity and impatience. The family, Alfred and his wife Lydia, Harry, George and his wife Magdalen, David and his wife Hilda, Pilar Travados, and Stephen Farsett, all stood in varying states of unease. The butler, Tressilian, hovered near the door, his hands clasped tightly, as though anchoring himself against the storm about to break. Mies Amos, Poirot began, his voice calm but resonant, cutting through the crackle of the fire. We are gathered here, on this day of peace and goodwill, to bring an end to a most heinous affair. The murder of Simeon Lee, a man whose life was as complex as the motives that swirled around his death, demands resolution. And Hercule Poirot, he does not rest until justice is served. A murmur rippled through the room. Alfred shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. Lydia, beside him, stared at the floor, her face pale but composed. Harry leaned against the mantelpiece, his roguish grin replaced by a tense frown. George puffed out his chest as though preparing to deflect any accusation, while Magdalene's fingers toyed nervously with her pearl necklace. David's eyes burned with a quiet intensity, his wife Hilda clutching his arm as if to steady him. Pilar, the enigmatic granddaughter, sat with her hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes unreadable. Stephen Farr, the outsider, stood slightly apart, his expression one of wary curiosity. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Let us begin with the facts. Nest si pas. Simeon Lee was found dead in his locked room on Christmas Eve, his throat slashed, the furniture overturned, and a scream that echoed through this very house. The window was locked, the snow outside undisturbed, and yet the killer had vanished. A puzzle, but not an unsolvable one. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. First, we consider the scene, a locked room. It suggests an impossibility, but Poirot, he knows there is no such thing. The hidden passage behind the fireplace, accessible by a concealed lever, provided the means for the killer to enter and exit without breaking the lock or leaving footprints in the snow. The blood-stained glove found in that passage, belonging to Monsieur Harry, pointed to a male culprit, so it seemed. Harry straightened, his jaw tightening. I told you, Poirot, I was in the passage. Yes, but I didn't kill him. I was just exploring, seeing what the old man was hiding. Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. Oui, Monsieur Harry, I believe you. The glove, it was a clue, but not the key. Let us turn to another clue, the strange whistle heard by the maid, followed by the scream. In the attic, I discovered a phonograph, with a record labeled Scream, capable of mimicking a human cry. This was no coincidence. The scream was staged, meant to mislead us into believing the murder happened at the moment of the crash, when in truth it could have occurred earlier. A gasp escaped Magdalen, her hand flying to her mouth. George muttered something under his breath, his face reddening. Poirot continued, undeterred. The diamond-shaped mark on Simeon's desk led me to his past in South Africa, where he dealt in uncut diamonds. A tiny diamond chip near the fireplace suggested a connection, perhaps a distraction planted by the killer. And then, there was the empty safe, its contents stolen, hinting at a motive tied to wealth or something more personal. He paused, letting his words settle. The family exchanged glances, each searching for signs of guilt in the others. Poirot's gaze lingered on Pilar, whose serene expression seemed to falter for a moment. Mademoiselle Pilar, he said, your arrival at Gorston Hall was most intriguing. You claim to be Simeon's granddaughter, the daughter of his late daughter, Jennifer. Yet, when I examined your papers, I found inconsistencies. Forged documents, perhaps. A story too convenient to be true. Pilar's eyes widened, but she quickly regained her composure, her voice steady. I am who I say I am, Monsieur Poirot. My mother spoke of her father often. I came to claim what is mine. Poirot tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. We shall see. But let us consider another player in this drama, monsieur. Stephen Farr, your father, Simeon's business partner, was wronged by him, cheated out of a fortune in diamonds. A motive for revenge, Nan. And yet, you were welcomed warmly by Simeon, a fact that puzzled your fellow heirs. Stephen's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, his eyes fixed on Poirot. The detective turned to the family at large. Each of you had reason to despise Simeon Lee. Alfred, your loyalty was rewarded with dependence, your life tethered to his whims. George, your greed for his wealth was no secret, nor was your indignation at his taunts. David, your hatred stemmed from the cruelty that drove your mother to her grave. And Harry, your roguish charm masked old grudges, did it not? He paused, his gaze sweeping over the women. And the ladies, Madame Lydia, your quiet strength hid years of enduring Simeon's verbal lashings. Madame Magdalene, your elegance conceals a fear of losing your status. Madame Hilda, your devotion to David could push you to protect him at any cost. And Mademoiselle Pilar, your motives remain unclear. The room was silent, save for the crackling fire. Poirot's voice softened, but its edge remained. Last night, I set a trap, a fake diamond, placed in the safe, rigged with a bell to alert me if disturbed. When the bell rang, I found Monsieur George attempting to open the safe, claiming he only wished to secure his inheritance. But another clue, more subtle, emerged: the faint scent of perfume in the hidden passage, a scent that did not belong to any of the men. Lydia's head snapped up, her eyes wide. Poirot stepped closer to her, his voice gentle but unrelenting. Madame Lydia, you have played your part well. The meek wife, always in the background, enduring Simeon's cruelty with grace. But I see more. I see a woman who has suffered, who has watched her husband's spirit erode under his father's dominance. I see a woman who would do anything to protect him. Lydia's hands trembled, but she said nothing. Alfred turned to her, his face a mask of confusion. Lydia, what is he talking about? Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Let us reconstruct. The night of the murder, the killer entered Simeon's room through the hidden passage, using the lever behind the fireplace. The phonograph was set to play the scream, creating the illusion of a struggle at the moment of the crash. The furniture was overturned, perhaps before or after the deed, to suggest a violent confrontation. Simeon's throat was slashed, and the killer exited through the passage, leaving the door locked from within. The diamond chip was planted to mislead, to point to Simeon's past dealings, but the perfume, Madame Lydia, it betrayed you. Lydia's composure cracked, her voice barely a whisper. You're wrong, Monsieur Poirot. I wouldn't. Poirot shook his head. Nan, Madame, I have seen your strengths, your resolve. You saw Simeon's plan to change his will, to toy with your husband's future once more. You heard his taunts, his promise of a Christmas none would forget, and you acted. You used the phonograph to mask the true time of death, the passage, to enter and exit unseen. The glove, perhaps borrowed from Harry's room, was a clever misdirection. But the perfume, a scent as distinctive as your presence, lingered in the passage. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Alfred stood, his voice shaking. Lydia, tell me this isn't true. Lydia's eyes filled with tears, and she rose, her voice breaking but clear. I did it, Alfred. I did it for you. He was going to ruin us, to take everything you've worked for, everything we've endured. He mocked you, humiliated you, and I couldn't bear it any longer. I wanted us to be free. She sank back into her chair, sobbing, as Alfred stared at her in stunned silence. Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. Madame Lydia, your love for your husband drove you to this act, but it was a crime nonetheless. The law, it must take its course. Colonel Johnson stepped forward, his face grim. I'll have to take her in. Poirot, you've done your work. As always. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving Lydia. But let us not forget the others. Mademoiselle Pilar, your deception as an impostor, hired by Monsieur Harry to secure a share of the inheritance, was a distraction, but not the crime, Monsieur. Harry, your exploration of the passage was reckless, but not murderous. The rest of you, your motives were real, but your hands are clean. He turned to the family, his voice softening. Simeon Lee was a man who sowed discord, who thrived on manipulation. His death, it was not justice, but it was a consequence of the pain he inflicted. Let this be a lesson, Mies Amos, that hatred and greed breed only sorrow. The family dispersed, some in silence, others in hushed whispers, as Colonel Johnson led Lydia away. Gorston Hall stood silent under the snow, its festive lights dimming as the truth settled over it like a shroud. Poirot lingered by the Christmas tree, his fingers brushing a glass ornament, his mind already turning to the next mystery. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of those who had come and gone, leaving only the memory of a Christmas that none would forget. Chapter 11. The ghost of Gorston Hall. The snow continued to fall gently outside Gorston Hall, blanketing the estate in a deceptive calm. Inside the grand hall, still adorned with festive holly and twinkling lights, felt hollow after Lydia's tearful confession. The family, shaken by Poirot's revelation, had dispersed to their rooms, each grappling with the weight of betrayal and loss. Hercule Poirot, however, remained in the parlor, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if the walls themselves might whisper another secret. Colonel Johnson, his old friend and the local chief constable, lingered by the fire, nursing a glass of brandy, his face etched with disbelief. "Poirot, you've done it again," Johnson said, his voice low but admiring. "Lydia, of all people. I'd have bet my badge on Harry or that far fellow." Poirot adjusted his moustache, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Mon ami, the heart of a crime lies not in the obvious but in the subtle. Lydia's meekness was her greatest disguise. But I confess, there is yet a thread left dangling in this tapestry of deceit." Johnson raised an eyebrow. "A thread? You've caught the killer, man. What's left?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of curiosity. "The matter of the diamonds, Colonel. The safe was empty, yet the diamond chip and the mark on Simeon's desk suggest a treasure hidden. And then there is the question of the whistle, the maid's testimony. It was not accounted for in Lydia's scheme. Nan, there is another hand at play, I think." The colonel set his glass down, leaning forward. "You're saying there's more to this murder?" "Perhaps not to the murder itself," Poirot replied, tapping his temple, "but to the events surrounding it. Hercule Poirot does not rest until every piece fits perfectly." The morning after Christmas dawned crisp and bright, the snow reflecting the pale sunlight in dazzling patterns across the estate. Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stood at the foot of the grand staircase, observing the household as it stirred. The servants moved quietly, their usual efficiency tinged with unease. The family, still reeling from Lydia's arrest, emerged one by one, their faces drawn and eyes averted. Alfred, pale and hollow-eyed, seemed a shadow of the devoted son. He, who had betrayed Harry nursing a hangover, slouched into the dining room, muttering about leaving for London. George, ever the politician, was already discussing legal matters with a solicitor by telephone, while David paced the hall, clutching a sketchbook as if it were a lifeline. Pilar, now revealed as an impostor named Estella, remained under guard in her room, her fate uncertain. Stephen Farr, the outsider, lingered on the edges, his charming smile replaced by a guarded expression. Poirot's attention, however, was drawn to the butler Tressilian, who moved with a slight limp, his usual stoicism faltering. The old man's hands trembled as he polished a silver candelabra, and Poirot noted a flicker of fear in his eyes when their gazes met. "Monsieur Tressilian," Poirot called softly, approaching the butler. "A word, if you please." Tressilian stiffened but nodded, setting the candelabra down. "Of course, Mr. Poirot. How may I serve you?" Poirot gestured to a quiet corner of the hall. "You have served Gorston Hall for many years. You knew Monsieur Simeon better than most. Tell me, what did you make of his talk of diamonds, the uncut stones from his days in South Africa?" Tressilian's face paled, and he glanced toward the staircase, as if expecting Simeon's ghost to descend. "The master, he spoke of them often, sir, but always in riddles. He'd laugh and say the diamonds were his insurance, hidden where no one would find them. I never saw them myself, but he kept a ledger, locked in his desk. I assumed it was all bluster, him playing games with the family." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A ledger, you say? And this ledger, it was not in the safe?" "No, sir. I saw him put it in a secret drawer in his desk, years ago. I didn't think it important until now." Poirot's mind raced. The diamond-shaped mark on the desk, the chip by the fireplace, the empty safe all pointed to a hidden treasure. Perhaps the true motive behind Simeon's murder, or at least a secondary plot. "Mercy, Tressilian, you have been most helpful. Show me this desk. Sea-view plot." The butler led Poirot to Simeon's study, a room untouched since the murder, its heavy oak furniture and dark paneling exuding an air of menace. The desk, a massive piece carved with intricate patterns, stood against the far wall, its surface still bearing the faint diamond-shaped mark Poirot had noted earlier. Tressilian hesitated, then pressed a hidden catch beneath the desk's edge. A small drawer sprang open, revealing a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age. Poirot opened it carefully, his gloved fingers tracing the cramped handwriting. The ledger detailed shipments of uncut diamonds from South Africa, dated decades ago, with cryptic notations about their storage. One entry caught his eye: "Vault beneath the hearth, sealed by the star." The word star was underlined twice, and a crude sketch of a diamond shape accompanied it. "The hearth," Poirot murmured, turning to the fireplace where he had found the diamond chip. He knelt, examining the stonework. The fireplace was old, its bricks worn but solid, with a faint outline of a diamond shape etched into one of the lower stones. He pressed it, and with a soft click, a small panel slid open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside lay a velvet pouch, heavy with the unmistakable weight of uncut stones. Tressilian gasped. "The master's diamonds. They were real." "We," Poirot said, his voice tinged with triumph. But their discovery raises new questions. Who else knew of this hiding place? And why was the safe emptied, if not for these? Rest of the morning was spent in quiet investigation. Poirot interviewed the maid Horbury who had mentioned the whistle. She described it as a low, eerie sound, heard just before the crash on the night of the murder. It came from the garden, I think, sir, she said, twisting her apron nervously. I didn't see anyone, but it gave me the chills, like a ghost calling. Poirot's next move was to revisit the garden, where Harry had claimed to be during the murder. The snow had been disturbed since the crime, but Poirot's keen eye spotted a faint indentation near the yew hedge, partially covered by fresh powder. Kneeling, he brushed away the snow, revealing a small metal whistle, its surface tarnished but intact. He held it up, turning it in the light. A signal, perhaps, he mused, but to whom, and for what purpose? Returning to the house, Poirot sought out Stephen Farr, whose connection to Simeon's diamond dealings made him a person of interest. Stephen was in the library, flipping through a book on South African history, his expression unreadable. Mr. Farr, Poirot began, you were close to Simeon's business dealings. Tell me about the diamonds. Stephen's jaw tightened, but he met Poirot's gaze. My father and Simeon were partners. Yes, they found a vein of diamonds in the Kimberley mines, but Simeon cheated my father out of his share. I came here to confront him, nothing more. I didn't know about any hidden stash. And yet, Poirot said, holding up the whistle, this was found in the garden, where you were seen on the night of the murder. A curious coincidence. Stephen's eyes widened, but he shook his head. I don't know anything about a whistle. I was in the garden, yes, but only to clear my head. Simeon's taunts were unsettling. Poirot let the matter drop for now, but his suspicions grew. The whistle suggested a coordinated effort, perhaps a signal to an accomplice outside the house, but Lydia had acted alone, or so she claimed. Was there another player in this deadly game? As evening approached, Poirot gathered the family once more in the grand hall, the Christmas decorations now seeming garish in the wake of tragedy. He stood by the fireplace, the velvet pouch of diamonds in his hand, and addressed them with calm authority. Madame et Messieurs, the murder of Simeon Lee was but one act in a larger drama. These diamonds, hidden beneath the hearth, were his true legacy. But someone else sought them, someone who knew of their existence and planned to claim them. The family exchanged uneasy glances. George blustered, are you saying one of us is a thief as well as a murderer? Not necessarily, Poirot replied. Lydia killed Simeon for her own reasons, anger, fear, loyalty to Alfred, but the empty safe, the whistle, the footsteps in the attic, these point to a second plot, one that remains unresolved. He turned to Tressilian, who stood at the edge of the room, his face pale. Monsieur Tressilian, you have served this family faithfully, but you know more than you have said. The whistle, the ledger, the footsteps, did you hear or see something you feared to reveal? Tressilian's hands shook, and he sank into a chair. I didn't want to believe it, sir, but the night of the murder, I saw someone in the garden, just before the crash. It was dark, but I'm certain it was Mr. Harry. And later, in the attic, I found a rope and pulley, hidden behind some crates. I thought it was nothing, just old junk. But now, Poirot's eyes lit up. A rope and pulley, mon Dieu, the pieces fall into place. Show me Tressilian. The butler led Poirot and Colonel Johnson to the attic, a dusty space filled with forgotten relics of Gorston Hall's past. Behind a pile of crates, Poirot found the rope and pulley, rigged to a trapdoor that opened onto the roof. He examined it closely, noting traces of wax on the rope, suggesting it had been used to lower something heavy, perhaps the contents of the safe. Back in the hall, Poirot confronted Harry. Monsieur Harry, you were in the garden, signaling with a whistle. You used the pulley to remove the contents of the safe through the roof, did you not? The diamonds were your prize, but Lydia's murder disrupted your plan. Harry's face flushed, but he laughed bitterly. You're clever, Poirot, I'll give you that. Yes, I knew about the diamonds. Simeon bragged about them years ago, said they were hidden where no one would look. I found a ledger last month, figured out the hearth trick. I planned to take them and disappear, but I didn't kill him. Lydia beat me to it, and the whistle, Poirot pressed, to signal Estella Pilar, She was in on it, supposed to distract the family while I worked, but it all went wrong when Simeon screamed. Poirot nodded, satisfied. You are a thief, Monsieur Harry, but not a murderer. The diamonds will be returned, and you will answer for your actions. The chapter closed with Gorston Hall settling into an uneasy peace. Harry was detained, Estella's fate left to the courts, and the diamonds secured by Colonel Johnson. Poirot, standing at the window, watched the snow fall, his mind already turning to the next mystery. The human heart, mon ami, he said to Johnson, is the greatest puzzle of all. But with order and method, even its secrets can be unveiled.